Christmas time. What do children wait for during this period? The fairy tale Santa Claus who will bring gifts. What do adults wait for? Probably a miracle that will change life for the better. On the 14th of December, 1991, in the middle of the night, during the Christmas season, the young family was also waiting for a miracle, and Jason was looking forward to unwrapping his Christmas presents. But the miracle never happened. Christmas Eve for the young couple was destroyed by a maniac who appeared and disappeared like a shadow in the night. The only witness was a child who saw the killer's eyes before the murderer slipped away from the crime scene, leaving the boy's parents to die. And that sinister gift for Jason would remain in his memory for the rest of his life. Help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. It happened just a few days before Christmas, on a warm night in Florida, when the holiday itself wasn't even felt, except for all the New Year decorations. 12-year-old Jason Rowley had just fallen asleep on the top bunk of his bed. His younger brother and two sisters were already asleep, and the house was quiet, calm, and safe. Jason had personally made sure his brother and sisters brushed their teeth and washed up. He read them bedtime stories and then turned off the light. Mom and stepdad had gone out, and this was one of those rare evenings when Jason was left in charge. He was proud that they had trusted him with such responsibility. Babysitting the younger kids made him feel like an adult. The boy put his head on the pillow and soon fell peacefully asleep. Around 3 in the morning, the peace in the house was shattered. First, some strange, unclear sound woke Jason. Then came the feeling that something was wrong. He still couldn't fully understand what was happening. Maybe it was the creak of floorboards or something falling onto the floor. Jason lifted his head from the pillow. The room was dark. He sat motionless, letting his eyes adjust and his ears catch the strange sounds. Instinct told him he needed to get up and go look, so the boy bravely climbed down from the top bunk. His feet silently touched the floor, but his heart was pounding wildly. Jason didn't rush. He quietly made his way to the bedroom door. When he slowly opened it and stepped into the dark hallway, he saw a shocking sight. His stepdad Kit was fighting a man in black. The boy's eyes tried to make out every detail, but it was difficult. The two men were struggling, slamming each other against the walls. The stranger's face was hidden by a ski mask. And then it hit Jason. The man in black wasn't just pushing Kit. He had a knife and a hatchet in his hands. Stepdad was trying to hold the intruder back, but it was clear he was losing the fight. The boy froze. At that moment, everything slowed down. He watched as the unknown man tried to take the life of his family. Blood was smeared across all the walls. Furniture was overturned. The fight was loud, desperate, and brutal, and then the attacker turned and met Jason's gaze. For a second, the boy saw rage in the stranger's eyes, as if this person had only one goal to take life. He didn't hesitate and seemed to have no soul. Jason looked down and saw his mom. Anita was lying on the floor, covered in blood. A deep wound was visible on her throat. The still sleepy child didn't immediately realize what he was seeing. Was Mom dead? Had the man in black stabbed her with the knife? What had happened at all? However, somehow, miraculously, Anita was still alive. The boy saw that she wasn't going to give up. She was still fighting and trying to protect her family. Despite her injuries, the woman reached for the baseball bat on the floor, slowly got to her feet, and while the stranger was distracted, she hit him on the head with such force that he lost his balance and stumbled. Kit, who was already bleeding out, shouted to Anita to get the gun, and Anita rushed to the pantry. Jason didn't even know there was a weapon in the house, but he was sure they needed that gun right now, because the man in black was going to finish off the whole family. However, the attacker didn't wait for Anita to come back with the weapon. With almost no effort, the man tore Kit off the floor and threw him into the bedroom. Stepdad hit his head on the bed frame, and the criminal quickly jumped out through the back sliding door. For a second, the house fell silent again. Anita was running on pure adrenaline. She ran to lock the front door. Blood was still flowing down her chest. Jason didn't stand still either. He rushed to the phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers, but the line was silent, no dial tone. Anita shouted to Jason to watch the younger kids, and she herself ran out the front door to the neighbors for help. She raced down the street, bleeding and nearly losing consciousness, but she still managed to knock on the nearest house in the middle of the night. At 3:12 a.m., a call came into 911 from Anita's neighbors. They told the dispatcher that Mrs. Young had come to them with severe bleeding from the neck and could barely speak. Meanwhile, 12-year-old Jason stood frozen in his parents' bedroom. The man who had raised him, played with him, taken him fishing, tucked him in at night, now lay in a pool of blood on his own bed. His stomach was slashed open and his intestines were spilling out. It was a horrifying and heartbreaking sight for anyone, especially a little boy. Jason walked over to his stepdad, took his hand, and held it tightly until Kit drew his last breath. There were no screams, no words. Just the boy's quiet sob as he tried to be brave, tried to comfort the beloved man as he slipped away forever. A few moments later, Jason headed to the front door. He saw flashing lights through the window the police had arrived. Jason walked outside barefoot, wearing only a t-shirt and underwear, his legs shaking. When he saw the female officer, he ran to her and hugged her around the waist. The child was in shock and couldn't speak. He just cried and couldn't calm down. But the officers needed to know what had happened inside the house. Jason tried to show with gestures how the man in black had repeatedly stabbed his stepdad in the stomach. That was the scene the detectives faced early in the morning of the 14th of December, 1991. A once happy family torn apart, a mother still clinging to life, a stepfather murdered in his own home, and a 12-year-old boy shaken, silent, but alive and unharmed, while in the background of the tragedy, 3 more children slept peacefully in their beds. They were rushed to the trauma center. Jason was placed in an ambulance so he could calm down a little. Soon, his younger sisters and brother woke up, but they still didn't understand that their lives had changed forever that night. A few minutes after the neighbors' call to emergency services, several police cars arrived at the house where the attack had occurred. The building on Madison Street looked like a set from a horror movie, but it was real. The front door was slightly ajar. Blood was visible on the driveway, and barefoot footprints were printed on the porch. When the officers went inside, they immediately smelled the thick metallic scent of blood. Red splatters and smears were everywhere on the walls, on the floor, on the stairs, on the furniture. The detectives moved carefully, not wanting to disturb the crime scene. Though the house was already in complete disarray, the artificial Christmas tree in the corner had been knocked over. Shards of broken ornaments littered the floor. The plastic pine needles were splattered with blood. A bloodied wooden baseball bat lay on the floor, and brown stains remained on the carpet. A crimson trail stretched down the hallway to the master bedroom, and a small chain of shoe prints was visible on the runner. No weapons were found in the house. Apparently, the attacker had taken them with him or thrown them somewhere nearby, hoping the knife and hatchet would never be found. Meanwhile, the paramedics' main attention was focused on the woman. She had serious stab wounds to the neck, shoulder, and chest. The medics did everything they could to stabilize her, but it soon became clear that Anita needed immediate specialized care. A helicopter was called to take the victim to the nearest trauma center. Unfortunately, the man in the back bedroom could not be helped. He had died on the scene. His name was Kit Young. He was only 31 years old. Kit's body lay sprawled on the bed in an awkward position, as if he had landed badly after being thrown. His legs hung over the side, and right above the headboard, there was a fist-sized hole in the drywall. It looked as if someone had slammed the body against the wall so hard that it left a dent. The sheets were soaked with blood, his clothes were torn. Apparently, this had happened during the fight. There were numerous stab wounds on his torso, arms, and legs, as if someone had kept stabbing again and again, even when it was no longer necessary. All of this happened while the children slept in the next room. There were 4 children, 12-year-old Jason, 9-year-old Rachel, 6-year-old Rebecca, and 3-year-old Nicholas. From the older boy's account, the detectives concluded that the attack had not been random. It wasn't a botched robbery. Whoever had come into the house that night clearly wanted to harm its residents. The police went into the children's bedroom, lighting the darkness with flashlights. They carried 3-year-old Nick out in their arms. On the way, the boy habitually glanced into his parents' bedroom and saw red paint spilled everywhere. The child didn't understand that it was blood and that the man sleeping on the bed Kit would never wake up again. Nicholas was too young to realize what had happened. Next, they woke Rebecca and Rachel and led them out of the house as well. After that, the crime scene technicians entered. Nothing had been stolen. The televisions and other household appliances were still in place. Not a single ornament was missing, and no drawer had been opened in search of valuables. So it clearly wasn't about money, it was about the people. The attacker, wanting a head start, had cut the phone lines. Back then, the main phones were landlines, not cell phones. Even the outdoor phone booth behind the house had been damaged, so no one could call for help. Now the investigators had to figure out who Kit and Anita were and who might have wanted them dead. One of the police officers accompanied Anita to the hospital. She was still alive, clinging to life. But looking at her wounds, it was safe to say the woman didn't have much time left. The detective asked Anita the most important question: who did this? He hoped the victim would make a dying declaration. A person on their deathbed would hardly lie. Besides, a dying declaration was considered evidence and accepted in court. Because of her injuries, the woman could barely speak, but instead of answering the officer's question, she asked where her husband was and whether the children were all right. Even in what might have been her final minutes, she cared most about her family. Everything Anita mumbled, the detective wrote down. From her unclear, doomed phrases, he understood that the victim did not know the attacker. But the phone lines had been cut before. It had happened several months earlier, in June. The information obtained from Anita was very limited, and the real key to solving the case was the life of the young family before the criminal tried to end it. The detective's main question revolved around who the primary target had been: Anita, Kit, or maybe both spouses? Despite her injuries, the investigators could not rule out the possibility that she herself had been the instigator. What if the wife had actually arranged the attack on her husband or hired the killer to harm Kit? The severity of her wounds made that version not entirely plausible. Or maybe Kit had attacked Anita and met fierce resistance from her. The investigators had not yet spoken properly with Jason and did not know he had witnessed the crime. So far, they had only examined the crime scene and the victim's injuries. First, the detectives decided to learn more about who the young family really was. They interviewed neighbors, called family members, and visited Kit and Anita's colleagues. The story that began to unfold was nothing like what the police had expected. To everyone who knew the couple, Anita and Kit were not just a happy husband and wife. They were proof that a broken heart could be healed by love. Anita had been through that. In her youth, she had gotten married, had children, and then divorced. One of 4 children, she had moved to Largo, Florida, and met Kit in a support group for single parents. She wasn't looking for love, she just wanted someone to talk to. Young was a quiet, divorced man. He had come to the support group for his own children. He had 2. Then he saw Anita and fell in love. And it was the kind of love story many people dream about. Anita's friends talked about how protected she felt after Kit moved in, how much easier everything became. Anita started smiling more and looked happy. But even bigger changes happened with her oldest son, Jason. The boy, who had always been very cautious and quiet, finally began to open up. He became friends with Kit. They shot at targets in the backyard. They spent hours outside and laughed as if they were real biological father and son. Kit didn't just take on the role of stepfather, he wanted to replace the boy's father. Anita and Kit got married just a few months after they met. The wedding symbolized the beginning of something new. It was a second chance for both of them, a chance they had seized. That was exactly what made the crime so terrifying, because it felt as if someone had walked into the Youngs' home full of hope and promises and simply destroyed it. So who wanted to harm the parents of 6 children and destroy a loving family? Who could the Youngs have crossed? Jason, who had just witnessed his stepfather's death, was temporarily taken in by his grandparents. Despite the tragedy, the officers had to disturb the boy and find out what he had seen the night before. Jason told them the attacker had been wearing gloves and a ski mask and was dressed all in black. Almost no skin was visible, only a gap between the man's black sweatshirt and the bottom of his ski mask. The boy was sure the attacker was black, and he had a knife and a hatchet in his hands. He was thin but muscular, bigger than his stepdad. The child also thought he saw a scar or something like that on the stranger's neck right under the mask. The attacker hadn't said a single word. He acted in silence, even when he noticed the child. Let's go back to Anita, who was clinging to life with her last strength. She had been struck in the head with a hatchet and stabbed in the neck area. In addition, the woman had serious cuts, scratches, and deep wounds all over her body from fighting back. But perhaps the strongest pain, besides the physical, was the emotional pain. Anita woke up after several difficult operations and saw her brother at her bedside. It was he who told her the terrible news about Kit's death. Her road to recovery was very long. Anita was tormented by guilt after realizing she was once again alone, without support, without the beloved man beside her. She no longer wanted to live. Only her concern for the little ones gave her strength. The woman also wanted to find the person who had destroyed her quiet family happiness. Now that Anita could speak, the detectives asked her again about the events of that night. After studying the victim's lifestyle, the police, together with the FBI, tried to create a profile of the attacker. The authorities used the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, a system that allowed them to enter specific data about the crime scene and victims, and then search for potential matches in a database of previously committed crimes. Every criminal had certain patterns in choosing victims. Anita remembered sleeping in bed next to her husband Kit when she heard the bedroom door open. The woman opened her eyes and saw a hooded figure looming over her. Before she could react, she was struck in the head with a hatchet. Anita screamed to wake her husband and was immediately slashed across the throat with the knife. Kit, woken by the noise, pulled the attacker off his wife, but during the struggle he received several stab wounds. The investigators wondered who would benefit from Anita's death. To understand that, let's get to know the victims of this terrible crime better. So, Anita was born in May 1957 into the Rowley family. She was the youngest of 5 children. Anita's father was a pastor, so the family in which the girl grew up was very religious. Like many young girls, there was a time in Anita Rowley's life when she believed in fairy tales. Not the ones with spoiled princesses and magical castles, but more realistic ones. A quiet, safe home, happy children, a loving man, and a life filled with faith. Anita was only 23 when she met Luther Bass at her father's church in Largo, Florida. The girl had attended that church since childhood, and since her father had been a pastor his whole life, she was surrounded by scripture and church routines. Anita was very kind and always put the well-being of others above herself. A year and a half earlier, at the age of 22, she had become a mother. Her son Jason was only 18 months old. She herself was young, but she knew what it meant to sacrifice, so she took her responsibilities very seriously. One Sunday, a man walked into the church. He was handsome, tall, confident, and very polite. It was Luther Bass. He was a football player with big ambitions and had just moved to Florida to try out for a new team. The man was firm in his faith, and that was what attracted Anita. There was gentleness and sincerity in him. Although Anita wasn't looking for love, something about Luther drew her in. He made her laugh and didn't even blink when he came for Thanksgiving and saw her holding her son in her arms. In reality, Luther from the very beginning treated Jason as if he were his own son, and that, of course, meant a lot to Anita. So the young people began dating. The relationship developed easily. Just a few months later, in May 1981, Luther and Anita were married in her father's church. During the first years of marriage, they had 3 more children, 2 daughters, Rachel and Rebecca, and a son, Nicholas. Anita loved being a mom. Later, she said that the early years of marriage to Luther were the happiest in her life. But looking back, she admitted that everything was not as perfect as it had seemed then. Luther wanted to be the provider, the head of the household. But his idea of family life was stuck at the level of a black and white sitcom: dinner on the table, the house spotlessly clean, and the children already asleep when he came home from work. Anita's first husband was not a mean or nasty person. He simply didn't get involved in anything. Not in everyday matters, not in raising the 4 children. His attention was focused on boats. He had given up his dream of making it to the NFL. Instead, he decided to devote himself to a career in boat building. He gave that pursuit all his strength. It was his passion, his pride, and what he dreamed of doing. At first, Anita fully supported her husband. She even went to school to become an accountant so she could help Luther run the business and manage the finances. When he was offered a huge contract to build a 350-foot yacht, he was thrilled. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. The only problem was that they had to move to rural northern Florida into a completely new house. Considering the number of children, Anita thought it would be a wonderful change of life. The couple packed their things, took the children, and headed west of Gainesville, right to the waters of the Gulf. The move had a positive effect on the children, especially on Jason. Even though Luther was not his biological father, life in the countryside gave them a chance to grow close. The 2 of them would go out to the backyard and shoot at targets with rifles. The boy finally felt a strong male shoulder beside him. Although life was calm and predictable, Anita had to adapt to the demands of solving financial issues and keeping her husband's business running smoothly. The lack of readily available resources and services, typical of rural areas, complicated everyday life, and Luther couldn't afford to hire extra help, so he had to do most of the work himself. Perhaps that was why the yacht construction didn't go according to plan. Luther made a mistake that cost the family dearly. They lost the project, lost the money, lost the warehouse where the construction was taking place. They even lost the house, and then they were forced to file for bankruptcy. That became the beginning of the end for the couple. 4 children, limited means, and no home of their own destroyed the familiar routine. Anita could no longer look after the little ones, keep the house, and cook dinners. She had to forget about her status as a housewife and go out to earn money. Of course, she adapted, because she always had, but it changed everything. By the 9th year of marriage, Anita's patience had reached its limit. She needed support, a male shoulder she could lean on. The woman took the children and returned to Largo, Florida. Luther stayed behind to help finish the doomed boat. 9 years is a long time. And Anita tried to make the separation as painless as possible. She got a job at a fast food restaurant, worked herself to exhaustion, but managed. The mother of many relied on her husband's financial help with childcare and other expenses. Luther came every other weekend to visit the children. Wanting to provide for his family, he made a difficult decision to give up his boat-building business and start a new career as a firefighter in his hometown of Boise, Idaho. Luther hoped that in 6 months he would get on his feet and Anita and the children would move to him. But Anita had no plans to move to Boise and no desire to return to her husband. At that point, she couldn't even be in the same room with him. The emotional burden of the last 9 years had been too heavy. And soon after Luther left for Boise, she filed for divorce. Only then did Luther realize their marriage was over. He had been so wrapped up in his life and dreams that he hadn't noticed his wife pulling away. Many people, diving headfirst into their careers, one day seem to wake up and realize they have lost their family, that their partner no longer wants to be with them because all those years he or she was unhappy and they never even noticed. The divorce was very painful. Luther felt insulted and betrayed, as if all his hard work, all his efforts, had been for nothing. He didn't want to lose his family, especially the children, and he asked for full custody. However, the judge decided that she was more deserving of staying with the children, since she had been the one taking care of the little ones the entire time Luther was pursuing his business ventures. The court's decision disappointed the man, and what was even worse, because of the move, he was allowed only 2 weeks of visitation a year under supervision. That was very little for a father who wanted to be near his children. The divorce was finalized in January 1991. Luther's next visit to the children was scheduled for June. The ex-husband showed up at Anita's house, intending to take the children on a short trip for a few days to Orlando to visit theme parks and have fun as a family. A woman with a child was waiting in the car. It was his new girlfriend, Connie, with her son. Anita was confused and didn't know what to do. Luther hadn't warned her that he wanted to take the children out of town, and in the company of a stranger. Deep down, the mother was afraid that if she let the little ones go so far away, her ex-husband might take them for himself, and she would never see them again. She didn't know for sure what Luther was planning. On top of that, the court had issued a negative ruling regarding unsupervised trips, so Anita refused to violate the court order and told Luther he could not take the children to Orlando. The man changed his plans and instead took the children to the local beach. Of course, Luther was upset. He had come all the way from Boise to spend 3 days with the children, his girlfriend, and her child, only to be refused. But he had no other choice. After the ex-husband returned the children to their mother, he continued living his life and no longer kept in regular contact with them. No calls, nothing. Anita calmed down and realized she had done the right thing. By that time, Anita herself had managed to marry another man she had met in a group called Parents Without Partners. She had genuinely been interested in the idea of talking with other single parents who had gone through a similar experience. And at one of those meetings, Anita met Kit Young. Kit was born in 1,960 inches, Arizona, and, like Anita, was one of 5 children. In 1978, he had moved to Florida, where he got a job as a technician repairing air conditioners, ventilation, and heating systems. By the time he met Anita, Kit was divorced and shared custody of 2 children with his ex-wife, Linda. Every morning he woke up at 5 o'clock to take the children to school. Anita was impressed by his dedication to his sons. Not every man is willing to get up earlier just to fulfill his parental duties. At least her ex-husband Luther had never shown much interest in his children. But what struck Anita most was how Kit interacted with her kids. He was very sincere, kind, and patient. Anita and Kit had a lot in common. Once they got to know each other better, they immediately clicked and soon officially began dating. Then Kit moved into Anita's house. The children were happy. Now their group was bigger and it was even more fun to play. There was incredible chemistry between the future spouses themselves. Kit made Anita feel like the most important person in his life. She hadn't felt that way in a long time because her first husband had cared more about his career and ambitions. In May 1991, just 3 months after the divorce, Anita got married again. Of course, it was fast, but now the woman was sure she would spend the rest of her life next to this man. The newlyweds and the children lived in the quiet little town of Largo, Florida. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. People left their bicycles in the yard without worrying they would be stolen. The town had a lazy, sun-warmed atmosphere, as if life flowed twice as slowly. Some families had lived there for generations, while others had come to Largo to start over. No one locked their doors during the day. Children rode their bikes home from school unsupervised. After dinner, parents sat on their porches, chatting with neighbors. That was exactly what made the crime so terrible, because nothing like it had ever happened in Largo. That was where Kit and Anita spent the spring, summer, and fall. They were planning to celebrate their first Christmas together and could never have imagined that tragedy would strike inside their family home. On December 14, the young couple made a spontaneous decision to spend a romantic evening alone. Kit's children were at their mother Linda's house. Anita's oldest son, Jason, was supposed to watch his younger sisters and brother that evening. The parents felt confident leaving the little ones in Jason's care, how much he trusted him, and how impressed he was by the maturity Jason had shown. Then the stepfather said he loved him. That was just a few hours before Jason witnessed Kit Young's last breath. Back at the station, the detectives decided to investigate the incident that had occurred in June when the phone lines at Anita's house were first cut. Perhaps that had been the attacker's first unsuccessful attempt. It turned out that in June, Kit had filed a report and suggested that, in his opinion, someone had been watching the house. The police started by checking the people closest to the victims, their ex-spouses, Anita's first husband Luther, who lived in Boise, and Kit's first wife Linda and her new husband Steve, who lived just a few minutes' drive from the Young family home. What united them was something in common: custody drama, complicated feelings, and a past that hadn't been put to rest because small children were involved. The detectives began with Kit's ex-wife, since she could reach the house most easily. On the night of the attack, 2 of her children had, by a happy coincidence, been at Linda's house and did not witness the horror. When the investigators told Linda the news of Kit's death, the woman seemed genuinely upset. She cried and reacted quite appropriately, like someone learning of the death of the father of her children. On the night of the attack, Linda had been sleeping at home with her husband and sons, but there were no witnesses who could confirm her words other than family members. Also, just a few days before the crime, there had been tension between the ex-spouses over the children. Linda had been planning to file a motion to modify the custody agreement, and the day after the massacre, she had a meeting scheduled with her lawyer. Of course, that didn't mean she had killed Kit, but for a while, Linda became a person of interest to the police. However, there was also Luther Bass, who was angry at his ex-wife for not letting him take the children on the trip to Orlando. But since then, the ex-spouses had had no contact, and Luther was more than 3,500 kilometers away. After talking with his employer, it turned out that Anita's ex-husband had left town for the weekend when the attack occurred. It was hunting season, and according to his girlfriend Connie, Luther often went into the woods alone. There was nothing unusual about that, and it raised no alarm. The man had left early Saturday morning, December 14, and still hadn't returned home. No matter how suspicious it looked, at that point the authorities had no evidence linking Bass to the attack on Kit and Anita. Luther only showed up in the evening. After waiting for him, the detectives immediately took the man to the police station, where they told him that a brutal attack had been committed on Anita and that her husband Kit Young had been killed. The first thing Luther wanted to know was whether the children were all right and whether Jason had been hurt. However, he never once asked about his ex-wife's condition. The police asked Bass to provide saliva, blood, and hair samples, and he agreed without any problem. They took his clothes, examined his entire car, the tires, dirt, stains in the interior, and other suspicious items. They ran a background check, which came back clean. There was nothing in his record indicating a tendency toward violence, and he had no criminal history. Luther was fully cooperative and did not match the description of the attacker. Driving one way would have taken him 39 hours. A round-trip flight would have been 8 or 9 hours. But there were no records of Anita's ex-husband flying from Boise to Florida. However, on the morning of Monday, December 16, a breakthrough occurred in the case. A bloodied ski mask and glove were found on a golf course about 1.5 miles from the Young's house. The evidence was sent to the crime lab for analysis, but that wasn't the end of it. While the police were collecting evidence, a group of teenagers approached them. They said they had seen a white man running from the direction of the house on the night the crime was committed. He was wearing dark clothes, but he himself was light-skinned, so the 12-year-old Jason's statement was called into question. But the boy had not been lying. Jason was just a child who had watched a stranger try to take his parents' lives just steps away from him. Because of the stress he had experienced, the boy's memories could have become distorted. Inside the ski mask were traces of blood and natural light-colored hair. This once again confirmed that the criminal was a white man. The authorities also called in a team of divers to search the nearby bodies of water. In one of the ponds near the golf course, they found a roofing hammer with a small hatchet on the backside. Since the weapon had been in the water, there were no DNA traces or fingerprints left on it. 2 days before Christmas, Anita attended Kit's funeral with the children. Her family happiness had not lasted even a year, but it was even harder for her to watch her little ones say goodbye to their stepfather. 3-year-old Nicholas said he had pictured his parents as superheroes. He thought they were invincible, that nothing could happen to them. They couldn't get sick or, even worse, die. But now that Kit had gone to heaven, the boy was very scared. When Anita was asked who, in her opinion, might benefit from her death, she named only one name, Luther Bass. In that case, the ex-husband would no longer have to pay alimony. That was exactly why the man had wanted full custody. Once he had told Anita he would do anything in the world to get the children back. At the time, Bass was still one of the main suspects. He had a motive. Luther had not wanted the divorce and had surely hoped to win his wife back, and Anita had remarried just 3 months after the separation. That possibly intensified his desire for revenge. The only problem was that the police had no gas receipts or any bank account data indicating that Luther had been in Florida, not a single phone call or text message. Then Kit Young's first wife, Linda, confessed to the police that her new husband might have killed her ex. She had been so worried that she had checked all the knives in the kitchen to make sure none was missing. The thing was that even after she remarried, she had been having an intimate relationship with Kit. Her husband had found out about it, and, of course, he was furious. Linda and her second husband, Steve, took a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive. However, no evidence of Steve's involvement in the crime ever appeared. Although the investigators never officially ruled out that theory, they did not believe the man was the killer. The investigation had reached a dead end. In January 1992, the lab results for the ski mask and glove came back. Neither Luther Bass nor Steve matched. However, DNA technology was still so imperfect that it could not guarantee a 100% match. About 3 months later, in March 1992, another breakthrough occurred in the case. Luther Bass's new girlfriend, the ex-husband of Anita, told the police that when he returned from that hunting trip, he had had a wound on his head, as if someone had hit him. When she asked the man about it, he just brushed it off. Then, in conversation, Luther casually mentioned that in June 1991, instead of going into the mountains, he had gone to his ex-wife's house and tried to break in. When that failed, he cut the phone lines. The man considered his ex-wife a bad mother and a terrible housekeeper. Moreover, Luther stated that he could kill Anita and not regret it one bit. Connie begged Bass to move on, but he couldn't. Anita's new marriage simply drove him crazy. After that, Connie made a sensational confession. She said that on the weekend the crime occurred, Luther had not gone hunting. He had used his friend's social security number and taken a flight to Tampa, Florida. The detectives were stunned by the new information, but they still had no grounds for an arrest. They needed a confession from Luther himself. For that purpose, he was called in for questioning at the sheriff's office. As expected, the man was calm and denied everything. But the detectives were not going to give up. They handed Bass a letter from his daughter, 9-year-old Rachel, whom he had not seen for several months. On one side of the sheet was a drawing of a heart, symbolizing Kit, the man they loved, the man they called stepdad, the man who had been brutally taken from them. The note said, "This is our family when you weren't around." On the other side was a broken heart. It represented Luther, their biological father. The caption under the broken heart read, "And this is when you came back into our lives." At the bottom of the letter were drawn crying faces and the inscription in English, "We're all fine here and we love Kit." The detectives said nothing. They simply let Luther read the message from his daughter, and something inside him broke. At first, it was a slight change in posture, a long silence. Then the police sensed his emotional state and played along a little, and Luther finally confessed. He said the target had never been Kit, it was Anita. After that, Bass poured out everything. He began to complain, remembering what a bad housekeeper Anita had been. He said he hadn't wanted his children living in a mess. Luther described how he had broken into the house and slashed his ex-wife's throat. He claimed he had only wanted to wound Kit and called him a victim of circumstance. The man also confessed that he had tried to break into the house earlier, in June 1991, when the Youngs discovered their phone lines had been cut and the window screen damaged. Bass fled the scene, got rid of the evidence, stole a bicycle, and rode it about 10 kilometers to the airport. Then he got on a plane and flew home, pretending he had been hunting. Luther assured the detectives he had done it all only for the children. He wanted to take them, marry Connie, and live happily ever after in a nice house. Before entering the master bedroom that night, he had spent about 20 minutes inside Anita's house. The adrenaline was pumping. Luther looked into the children's rooms and closed the doors more tightly so the little ones wouldn't hear or see anything. First, he slashed Anita's throat, hoping she would die. Then, before disappearing into the night, he had wanted to stab Kit a couple of times, the man who had woken up from his wife's screams. But Young was not going to give up without a fight. Despite several stab wounds, he kept coming, because 4 children were sleeping in the kids' room and could have been hurt, and Bass had to use all his strength to get rid of Kit. He ran because he got scared Anita had run for the gun. Luther regretted nothing. He was simply furious that Anita had not died. He had done what he thought was right, and he didn't care how it looked from the outside. After the full confession, Luther Bass was arrested and charged with murder, the attempted murder of Anita Young, and burglary. The trial did not last long. The evidence was irrefutable. The defendant's confession put a fat period at the end of the case. Every step Luther had taken had been deliberate and calculated. In March 1993, a little over a year after the attack, Luther Bass stood before the jury. He looked calm and almost indifferent. The judge sentenced Luther to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bass would never walk free again, but what he had done could never be undone. Anita Young sat in the courtroom, listening to the man who had once stood beside her at the altar and promised to love and protect her. The wound on Anita's neck had healed, but the scar would never disappear, just like the memories. She could not understand the man who claimed he loved his children, but had decided to make them orphans by slashing their mother and taking the life of their stepfather. Not even the 12-year-old boy watching the attack in horror had stopped him. After that incident, Jason, dressed only in an open t-shirt and underwear, felt his world collapse. It caused a kind of hypervigilance in him. Later in an interview, he said that after that night, he had not slept in pajamas once in 20 years. He slept in jeans, socks, and sneakers. Every night, as if someone might break into the house again and attack his loved ones. Jason had lost the only person who had treated him like a real son. Anita had lost the man who had given her a second chance at real love. He had accepted her with 4 children and surrounded them all with care and warmth. Even though Anita had survived, she never returned to her former life. The woman recovered from her physical injuries, but she had to deal with post-traumatic stress and short-term memory loss. Nevertheless, she tried to be strong for her children. In the first days after the incident, her family, the church community, and her faith in God helped her come to terms with what had happened. Today, she lives in Safety Harbor, Florida, and spends time with her children and grandchildren. But the old tragedy still does not let her go. Sometimes the greatest evil does not come from a stranger at your door. Sometimes the monster hides among those closest to you. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.
Today's story unfolds in New Orleans, a city that has seen much. Hurricanes, ghosts, broken hearts. Even in the chaos of one of America's worst natural disasters, Hurricane Katrina, 2 people found each other, Addie Hall and Zach Bowen. They were young, free-spirited, and had wild tempers. While the rest of the city was flooded and devastated, they danced in the streets, drank by candlelight, and called their love the end of the world. But when the electricity was turned back on and reality set in, their love story took a dark turn. Today, the apartment where it all happened has become a stop on New Orleans ghost tours. But what exactly happened behind the door of that apartment? The question remains open to this day. Was it trauma, a madness that set in after Hurricane Katrina? Or was it something darker that had been brewing even before the storm? Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. On Tuesday, October 17th, 2006, a New Orleans detective, Tom Moravich, arrived at a parking lot in the heart of the French Quarter. There, he discovered the body of a man who had jumped from the roof. Searching the pockets for identification documents, the officer found a small plastic bag with a tag that read the name Zachary Bowen. Also in the pocket was a folded piece of paper with the inscription, "Police Only." When the police unfolded the note, they read the following text: "This is no accident. I had to say goodbye to life to pay for what I took. If you send a patrol to 826 North Rampart Street, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend." Detective Moravich was shocked by the note, but what awaited the police at the specified address went beyond their imagination. The apartment was in an unbelievable mess. Boxes of things were piled everywhere, and all table surfaces were littered with empty beer cans. On the walls, the words, "I loved her," and "Please help me get rid of the pain," were written in black spray paint. And one more message, "Call my wife." When the police began searching the apartment, they discovered something horrifying. They realized that something very personal and very dark had happened there. To understand what happened, one must go back about 10 years. So, in early 1996, 17-year-old Zachary Bowen went on a cross-country trip through the southern states with his father. Zach was a charming but somewhat frivolous youth who had lived with his mother after his parents' divorce. As he got older, the young man went to live with his father for a while. The two of them went on a trip and, passing through New Orleans, Louisiana, fell so much in love with the place that they decided to stay there for a while. Zach enrolled in high school, but then dropped out. When the young man turned 18, he got a job at a local bar on the busy Bourbon Street in the French Quarter. That was where the city's nightlife was in full swing. Bourbon Street was home to many bars, live music played, and the delicious aromas of fresh food lured crowds of people there. One evening while at work, Zach met 26-year-old Lana Shupak, originally from Texas. Lana had been very independent from a young age. She worked as a dancer and, like Zach, often moved from place to place. Lana had come to New Orleans on vacation with friends. After meeting Zach, she quickly found a common language with him, and their relationship developed rapidly. After returning to Texas, Lana and Zach spoke frequently on the phone. Eventually, the young man convinced the girl to return and said they should live together. The lovers rented a small apartment and could not get enough of each other's company. But then, Zach confessed that he was only 18 years old. Lana, who had already turned 27, was shocked to learn her boyfriend's real age. The guy was tall and looked older than his years. Additionally, he worked in a bar, so the girl assumed he must be at least 21 years old. But things got even worse when she realized she was pregnant and their relationship began to crumble. In the end, Lana moved out, considering Zach still too young to become a father. She did not spread word of the pregnancy and decided to care for the future baby alone. On July 13th, 1997, Lana gave birth to a boy. The child was 1 month old when she realized she couldn't cope. Eventually, Lana asked a friend to call Zach and tell him about the baby. About an hour after the call, Zach held his son for the first time. The little boy completely transformed his consciousness. He made a promise to pull himself together and become a good father. Shortly after, Zach rented an apartment for his family in a good neighborhood. He began taking more shifts at work to provide for Lana and his son, and finally began to take everything more seriously. Everything was going its course until Zach was arrested. Police found him with a homemade bong, a smoking device made from an aluminum Coca-Cola can. Zach assured the officers that the can belonged to his friend, but the detectives did not believe him. The charges against Zach were only dropped after his friend appeared at the police station and confirmed that it was indeed his can. Although everything ended well for Zach, this event shook his self-confidence. He felt fear and began to doubt his actions. Zach desperately wanted to become a good, respected person, a caring husband, and a father. Not knowing how to proceed, he turned to his older brother, who was in the military, for advice. His brother advised him to enlist in the army, claiming it would provide confidence, keep him out of trouble, and help support his family. The idea seemed tempting to Zach, but he did not yet have a high school diploma, so joining the army had to be postponed for a while. In 1998, Zach turned 19 and proposed to Lana. They were raising a son and truly loved each other, so they considered starting a family a necessary step for their joint future. They married that same year, and in June 1999, they had a second child. Becoming a father of two made Zach think seriously about his life. He enrolled in a general educational development program, passed the exam, and received his diploma. Having completed all the necessary documents for military service, Zach signed an 8-year contract and went to basic training in May 2000. After training, Bowen was sent to his first duty station in Gießen, Germany. This was a kind of home base for soldiers between deployments. Lana and the children did not go with him, giving him time to settle in. They stayed in New Orleans, then followed Zach's first serious assignment. he was sent to Kosovo, which was recovering from war destruction. Zach's unit participated in a NATO peacekeeping mission. The work was extremely difficult. Zach was assigned to help open mass graves, carefully extract bodies, pack them in bags, and send them for identification. This required not only physical, but also moral strength. One day, while Zach was resting from work, he met a little girl on the street and gave her a candy. It was a simple, small act of kindness. But the next day, the young man learned that the little girl had been executed by opposing forces for talking to an American soldier. This event became one of Zach's first serious traumas abroad. From then on, those around him began to notice changes occurring in him. He became quieter, more withdrawn, and signs of depression began to manifest. This was later identified as post-traumatic stress disorder. But at the time, it seemed like something incomprehensible. Zach Bowen was a large guy, about 2 meters tall, and wore size 47 shoes. At that time, the Army did not make boots that size, so he had to wear smaller shoes, which of course led to foot deformation. Eventually, Zach's feet began to hurt unbearably, and he started wearing tennis shoes. By the time the Army made him custom-ordered boots, the limb damage was already irreversible, and Zach required surgery. Meanwhile, Lana and the children were still in New Orleans. Her husband sent her a pile of documents so she could fill them out and move to the base with him. Lana said she was tired from work and raising children alone, so she didn't have time to fill out the papers. So, Zach had surgery on his feet and was given sick leave. He went to New Orleans to spend time with his family and finally complete the necessary paperwork. When it came time to return to Germany, his family went with him, 2 children and Lana. This happened just before the September 11th, 2001. Tragedy occurred in the USA when 2 passenger planes hijacked by terrorists crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. After that, Zach and his squad were sent to Iraq, where they participated in active combat operations. Bowen saw his friends dying and being wounded. It was unbearable, and he didn't even have time to process what was happening. Then, Zach learned that a small Iraqi boy, whom he had been teaching English, was caught in a bombing. The entire family perished. This was another instance where innocent communication turned into tragedy. Bowen felt as if there was only death around him. It was hard not to lose his composure. To top it all off, information reached Zach that soldiers from another squad had brutally tortured prisoners. This caused him disgust and made him doubt everything he thought he was fighting for. His post-traumatic disorder intensified, and in November 2003, Zach returned to Germany a completely different person. The outgoing, cheerful guy turned into a withdrawn, silent type. During the following year, Bowen was in Germany, but everything he saw and experienced in the war left a deep mark on his soul. Over time, a hatred for military service began to grow in the man, and he intentionally made small mistakes to annoy those around him. This led to Zach eventually being discharged from the Army without being provided veteran benefits, life insurance, housing assistance, or medical care. Nothing. When Lana learned of the discharge, she got angry, packed her things, and left for America, leaving the children and her husband in Germany. The children were in school, and Zach wanted them to finish the semester, so he stayed with them until December 2004, and then they all returned to New Orleans. By that point, Lana had started dating an old friend. She no longer wanted Zach near her, so he stayed in a hotel while looking for permanent housing. The former soldier withdrew into himself even more. He told no one, not even his own mother, about what he had experienced in Iraq or what was happening in his family life. He just kept it all inside. Time passed. Zach turned 27, and he again found work as a bartender in the French Quarter, gradually becoming himself again, a cheerful, carefree, and pleasant guy people liked. Zach worked the night shift, and his sincere smile often attracted the attention of women. That was how he met 29-year-old Addie Hall, a colleague who worked the morning shift in the same bar. Addie was from North Carolina. Friends described her as a creative and free-spirited nature. Addie danced, painted, wrote poetry, and loved to travel. She dropped out of high school to become a dance teacher. In 2002, Addie went to New Orleans with friends and sincerely fell in love with the city. The amazing energy, crazy nightlife, and incredible atmosphere of New Orleans hooked her so much that she decided to stay there forever. However, there was a dark side to the creative Addie. When she drank or got high, she became angry and aggressive. The girl could easily lash out at strangers or start insulting her friends. She also carried an unloaded pistol in her purse and would sometimes take it out to scare those around her. At one point, Addie got into a toxic relationship where there was violence, and since then, she was cautious about choosing a boyfriend. So, in 2005, 29-year-old Addie Hall worked the morning shift in the same bar where Zach worked. It was not love at first sight. Addie thought Zach was somewhat dim-witted and predictable, but after some time, she began to notice that her thoughts kept returning to Bowen. Zach often stayed after his shift to talk to the daytime bartender, and their conversations gradually grew into something more. They began to get closer and open up to each other. Addie liked Zach more and more, and he could no longer imagine himself without Addie. Days went by, and soon the young people officially started dating. However, Zach forgot to tell his new girlfriend that formally he was still married and had 2 children. Obviously, this was a real shock for her. After experiencing a flash of anger, Addie still decided to continue the relationship. A few weeks after their romance began, tragedy struck: Hurricane Katrina. In late August 2005, meteorologists predicted that the storm would reach New Orleans and be classified as a Category 3 hurricane. Although this caused concern, authorities did not consider the threat critical and did not declare a mandatory evacuation. However, the forecast soon changed. The hurricane intensified rapidly and quickly reached Category 5. Officials urgently announced a mandatory evacuation order for the population of New Orleans and surrounding areas. Experts realized that delay could lead to a catastrophe. Zach's ex-wife and mother of his 2 children, Lana, concerned about the approaching hurricane, called her husband in a panic. She suggested evacuating together since she did not have a car. Lana was counting on Zach's help, but he refused. Instead, he decided to stay with Addie in her apartment in the French Quarter and wait out the storm. The French Quarter was located on high ground, so many local residents planned to stay in their homes until the end of the hurricane, considering it safe. Zach and Addie decided to do the same, and Lana was upset. She felt that Zach had put his relationship with his new girlfriend above the safety and well-being of his children, so she had no choice but to also stay in the city with the children and wait out the storm. On August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. Wind speeds exceeded 240 kilometers per hour. The measures taken to protect New Orleans proved ineffective. The levees that were supposed to protect the city failed, and after a few hours, 80% of the city was underwater. The destruction was colossal. Entire blocks were flooded. More than 200,000 homes were destroyed. About 1,800 people died. Electricity went out, and cell service barely worked. People did everything possible to survive. When the storm ended, Lana took the children and left for Texas. She tried to contact Zach, but without success. After several days of silence, the woman decided that he had not survived. The French Quarter suffered less than the rest of the city, but there too, there was still no electricity or mobile service. Zach and Addie took refuge in her apartment. The chaos reigning around brought them closer than ever. After the storm, they helped neighbors, cleared debris, and chopped down fallen trees. Soon, the survivors in the neighborhood formed their own small community. They gathered together, held picnics on the street, creating the feeling of a large family. For Zach and Addie, it was an exciting time. They had no work, no bills, no responsibility, and they liked it. They hung out almost every day, used illegal drugs, slept on a mattress they brought out to the street, listened to music from a small radio, and enjoyed a life detached from the rest of the country. The couple even managed to interest journalists with their behavior. An article in the New York Times stated that Addie Hall and Zachary Bowen from the French Quarter had found an unusual way to ensure regular patrolling of their street by law enforcement officers. Miss Hall attracted the attention of police cars by flashing her breasts. Eventually, rescue teams and army units arrived in the city, ready to clear debris and conduct additional evacuations. When Zach saw the soldiers, it triggered many memories he was trying to forget. His post-traumatic stress disorder began to manifest again, and the carefree, happy little world he had built with Addie cracked. When other residents began returning to the city, Zach and Addie felt irritation. They didn't even want to think about having to go to work again and perform duties. While everyone else was trying to return to normal life in the city, Zach and Addie hoped everything would stay as it was. About a month later, when life in the city returned to its usual rhythm, the couple realized they needed to find work. Zach got a job at a grocery store, and Addie started her job as a bartender. When Lana and the children returned to New Orleans and learned that Zach was alive and well, she was furious. While she mourned her ex-husband and looked for ways to feed her children, he was simply enjoying life in the ruined city with his new girlfriend. Lana and Zach met, and she told him that she was barely making ends meet and that she needed financial help. The spouses agreed that Zach would start paying child support and would take the children every weekend. Addie, learning of Zach's meeting with his ex-wife, became very angry. She felt that Lana was interfering in their lives, and Addie didn't like it. When the children came to visit their father, the woman refused to interact with them and simply left the apartment, often returning home drunk and locking herself in the bathroom. Eventually, Addie told Zach that the children could no longer stay in her apartment, and from then on, meetings with their father took place in a hotel room. Many friends said that this was the beginning of the end. Despite the fact that Addie and Zach returned to work, they did not stop throwing parties. Both used illegal drugs from time to time, and the bad habit was turning into a serious addiction. Before the couple realized it, they had managed to spend hundreds of dollars on white powder. Obviously, the pills and booze made their arguments more explosive. By the spring of 2006, the young people were breaking up and getting back together almost every day. Zach became insanely jealous of Addie because of her work as a bartender. He felt the girl was intentionally flirting with customers. Because of this, their arguments escalated into physical violence. One evening after a major fight, Zach told friends he had had enough and that he had broken up with Addie. The man went to his children, leaving a note saying he was leaving forever. Unfortunately, this did not last long. Soon, Zach changed his mind because these two were literally addicted to each other. After a few weeks of separation, he returned and immediately headed to Addie's. And they again began using illegal substances, drinking alcohol, and arguing. But now Zach was constantly losing control of himself and arguing not just with his girlfriend, but with everyone in sight. Addie was no better. One night, she got into a fight with a random guy on the street, pulled out a pistol, and pointed it at his face. The young man called the police, and Addie was arrested for assault with a firearm, possession of weed, and illegal substances. Zach did not post bail for her, leaving Addie behind bars. But as soon as she was released, she immediately returned to him. One night during another argument, Addie kicked Zach out, and he started pounding on the door, swearing and calling her the worst names possible. Neighbors called the police, and Zach was arrested. He spent 2 days in jail until Addie posted bail for him. These two were stuck in the grip of a dangerous, toxic obsession with each other. They could not be near each other, but separation for them was like death. The situation worsened when Zach admitted that he was bisexual and had started a relationship with a man. Addie exploded and they had a very big fight. The woman called her boyfriend every name in the book, then stole his mobile phone and deleted all his contacts. And she started telling Zach's friends that he had AIDS. At one point, Addie had a dispute with her landlord, and she suggested Zach move. They found an apartment on North Rampart Street in the French Quarter that was located on the very roof. The landlord, Leo, gave them a tour and said it was the perfect place for lovers. The couple liked the new housing, and they made a verbal agreement to rent it. Zach gave Leo $1,500, and the landlord gave them the key. 2 days later, Addie went to the landlord's office and asked him for a written lease agreement that would list only her name. Addie wanted to take revenge on Zach for his infidelity and finally break off their relationship. She and Leo quickly drew up the contract and signed it. In the early morning of October 5th, 2006, when Zach returned home from work, Addie told him what she had done. The man immediately realized he had been used to get the apartment. As a result, the couple had a massive fight. Addie was throwing Zach's things out of the apartment, calling him a loser and reminding him of his affair with a man. He, in turn, was bringing the things back in and insulting Addie in response. This could have gone on forever if Zach hadn't exploded at some point. He couldn't take it anymore. The only thing he wanted was for Addie to be quiet. Wrapping his hands around his beloved woman's neck, he squeezed until Addie's body went limp. When the realization of what he had done set in, Zach was horrified. The man did not know what to do next. Trying to calm down, he sat down, took Addie's diary, and began writing what had happened. "She stole this apartment, ask Leo. She tried to kick me out, but I strangled her. I did it calmly. After I desecrated the body several times, the question arose of how to get rid of the corpse." This was how Zach explained his act on the pages of the diary. At work, they immediately noticed something was wrong with Bowen. He looked terrible. To one colleague, Zach said that Addie had left him and returned to North Carolina. But everyone knew perfectly well that breakups in the pair occurred almost daily, so they didn't even pay attention to the man's words. In the diary, Zach left another entry stating that out of laziness, he had spent the whole weekend in bars with different girls, pumping himself with white powder until he was overcome by a sense of guilt for what he had done. Later, the full horror of the situation finally began to dawn on him. Bowen's plan was to spend all his cash and then kill himself. It began with a 9-day bender. Zach went to bars and strip clubs, used a bunch of illegal drugs, and constantly changed women. On October 14th, the smell of his home became unbearable. Zach turned the air conditioner on full blast, turning the apartment into a refrigerator to somehow stop the decomposition of the dead body. At some point, when Zach ran out of money, he realized that everything was coming to an end. Bowen spray-painted messages on the walls of the apartment, then sat down and wrote a suicide note, marking it only for police. 12 days after Addie's death, Zach went to a rooftop bar at a hotel in the French Quarter. He ordered a couple of drinks and chatted a bit with the bartender. Then, he walked to the edge of the building and began pacing back and forth near the railing. His behavior looked suspicious, but the bar staff decided he was going to run off without paying the bill. As soon as they were distracted by other patrons, Zach simply vanished. Seizing the moment, Zachary Bowen climbed over the railing in the blink of an eye and stepped into the abyss. He jumped from the roof of the 7th floor and fell to his death, putting an end to all his torment. When police arrived at the scene, the first thing they did was search the victim's pockets to identify him, and they found the note that led them to the apartment. Looking around, they noticed the spray-painted inscriptions on the walls, and then they discovered 2 pots on the kitchen stove. In one of them, under a lid, lay a human head, and in the other pot were hands. It all looked as if someone was going to cook soup. In the oven, in a large turkey roasting pan on a tray, lay pieces of roasted meat. These were legs. The torso was kept in the refrigerator in a large trash bag. It was likely the most disturbing scene the police had seen at a crime site. During the search of the apartment, detectives also stumbled upon the diary where Zach Bowen described what happened. After law enforcement officers called Lana and told her what happened, she did not believe the father of her children was capable of such atrocities. Her faith was shaken when friends and relatives blew up her phone, trying to convince her not to watch the news. Since the main figures in the case were dead, Bowen's family and friends tried to figure everything out on their own. They believed Zach had held a lot inside: the deployment, the loss of fellow soldiers, the death of innocent people, the failed marriage, Hurricane Katrina. All of this strongly affected him, and then he met Addie and became obsessed with her. Illegal substances, alcohol, and arguments seemed to simply push him over the edge and became the final drop in the bucket of patience. Zach's family took his body and organized a quiet cremation. His ashes were given to Lana and the children. As for Addie's body, it is not clear where or how she was buried, because it took several months before her family contacted the police station. This tragic story that shocked New Orleans became the basis for a book titled "Shake the Devil Off" by Ethan Brown, and people who learned of the romance of Addie Hall and Zachary Bowen seemed to go crazy. The media dubbed Zach with nicknames like Butcher Bowen, the Katrina Cannibal, and others. And New Orleans residents made t-shirts with the inscription, "Nothing says love like my girlfriend in the oven." Most likely, both Addie and Zach suffered from mental health issues. The man likely had post-traumatic stress disorder, but unfortunately, it so happened that as a combat veteran, he did not receive the necessary help. Instead, The tragic story grew with rumors that Zach was a cannibal, although the medical examiner found no confirmation of this. Zach and Addie's apartment has become a kind of stop on popular ghost tours in New Orleans. Now it is a real tourist attraction. People can go there and leave their offerings in the kitchen: cigarettes, booze, money, drawings. It is believed these gifts are made in honor of the lost souls of Zach and Addie. And some even claim they have seen the ghosts of the two lovers in the apartment. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video. The mother or me? That was the exact ultimatum a minor girl gave to her adult boyfriend. She was 14, he was 30. She was a traumatized teenager who had gone through a series of foster homes and knew neither home nor love. He was an adult man who surely should have known the line between care and crime. But this story is not just about a toxic relationship. It is about how the absolute, all-consuming obsession of one person broke the last barriers in the soul of another. Caitlin Coons was ready to do anything for Jonathan Jones. At some point, childhood infatuation proved insufficient. An enthusiastic attachment turned into a monstrous demand, an ultimatum that she delivered coldly and without hesitation, which would have shocked anyone. The girl gave her boyfriend 5 hours, just 5 hours, to prove his devotion. The price of that proof was unthinkable. He had to take the life of his own mother. Why did an adult man continue this communication at all? What forced a young girl to issue such a perverted ultimatum? And most importantly, what did Jonathan choose when the life of his mother was on one side of the scale and the madness of the girl he loved was on the other? Did he agree to this deal with the devil, or did he find the strength within himself to betray Caitlin to save the one who gave him life? This is the story of Caitlin Coons and Jonathan Jones. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Caitlin Coons was born on January 21st, 2006. The girl's childhood was not easy. Her biological parents, according to those around them, did not pay proper attention to the child's upbringing and often showed cruelty toward her. It is known that they inflicted serious psychological trauma on Caitlin. Because of this, Child Protective Services took the girl away from the negligent parents and placed her in a foster family. Caitlin's childhood years were spent in various places throughout Ohio, and it was there that the events of today's story unfolded. The girl often moved from one foster family to another, never staying long anywhere. Caitlin suffered from emotional and psychological problems, often acting out, getting angry, and getting into conflicts with other children. Because of this, she was constantly rejected and handed over to new guardians. The constant moves from one temporary family to another only worsened the situation. Every new hallway smelling of someone else's life, the cautious or indifferent eyes of new parents, all of it seemed to remind her, "You are extra. You are not one of us. You are just a temporary problem that will soon have to be passed on." Caitlin felt like an unwanted and unloved child. At the age of 12, her psychological state deteriorated and she began to self-harm. Physical pain seemed to be the only understandable, real feeling capable of momentarily muffling the unbearable despair in her soul. In parallel, another disorder emerged, an eating disorder. Food became for Caitlin not a source of life, but a battlefield, a weapon, and a punishment. The schoolgirl's weight constantly changed. She would either lose weight sharply, turning into a fragile, almost transparent shadow, or, having lost control, quickly gain extra pounds and hate every inch of her body. At some point, Caitlin simply stopped eating entirely. This was not a protest or a diet. It was a quiet, determined self-destruction. She silently pushed her plate away and made up excuses. For 5 days, her body, deprived of food, struggled, but then, due to weakness, Caitlin simply could not get out of bed. The world blurred before her eyes, and her heart rate began to slow. She had to be urgently hospitalized. The hospital became another stop in the girl's life, but this time it was no longer about spiritual survival, but physical. The same problems arose again and again, and over time, they began to take a toll on the teenager's emotional state. Caitlin suffered from depression and anxiety. which led to constant runaways from home. Her foster parents repeatedly reported her disappearance to the police, so the life of young Caitlin Coons was always full of difficulties and trials. And then the teenage girl reached the age of 14. It was at this time that she met a man named Jonathan Jones, and it was after this acquaintance that everything changed. Jonathan Jones was 30 years old. He grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Jonathan had always been a quiet, modest young man with good manners. At 18, he joined the army and was deployed to Afghanistan. Later, he met a girl from Kansas. They got married and had 2 children. Serving in the army had a strong impact on Jones. During his time in Afghanistan, the young man saw the horrors of the post-war period, becoming not only a witness to violent events, but also a participant. The man suffered a serious head injury and struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder. When he was discharged from the army at age 22, almost nothing remained of the former Jonathan, the shy boy with a direct gaze and good manners whom everyone once knew. He became nervous, twitchy, and sometimes aggressive. The army, which he had once chosen to become more masculine, released him back as a completely different person. He was not just discharged, he was broken. His good-natured smile was replaced by a tense grimace, and a constant wariness settled in his eyes, as if Jonathan were eternally expecting a stab in the back. After returning home, which should have been a healing process, his entire life began to fall apart. He couldn't hold a job for long, constantly cycling through one position after another. A warehouse loader, where the crashing of boxes drove him crazy. A night watchman, where intrusive thoughts plagued him in the silence and loneliness. A delivery driver, where constant communication with different people was required. In every job, Jonathan was undermined by his irritability, sudden bouts of apathy, and inability to withstand the slightest pressure from management. Jones's relationship with his wife deteriorated. The marriage, already cracked during his service, did not survive. His wife, who initially tried to help and understand, eventually grew tired of his withdrawal, outbursts of unprovoked anger, and the nightmares that made the man scream in his sleep. Common topics dried up. The silence at the dinner table became more and more unbearable. Ultimately, the couple divorced quietly, with a sense of bitter relief. After the divorce, the connection with his own children became agonizing and painful for Jones. Jonathan felt like a stranger at their birthdays and didn't know what to talk about during short, court-regulated visits. He began to drift away, missing calls and finding excuses until he hit rock bottom. Depression overwhelmed the man completely. The world finally lost its colors. Food, taste, and the new day stopped holding any hope. A doctor prescribed medications that only dulled the sharpness of the pain, but did not heal the wound itself. Eventually, having exhausted all options and strength, Jonathan returned to Toledo, Ohio, the city of his childhood, and settled in his old room in his mother's house. He returned not as a son, but as a refugee who had surrendered his positions. The walls of his childhood home became his last sanctuary, and his mother's gentle care gradually healed his emotional wounds. Shortly after his 30th birthday, Jonathan Jones met 14-year-old Caitlin Coons, and from that moment, his whole life went downhill again. Caitlin was living in a foster family, but due to health problems, she was in inpatient care. She was undergoing a course at the Emily program for eating disorders. The girl didn't like it at the hospital. According to her, the staff was too rude to her, so she ran away. On the street, Caitlin accidentally bumped into Jonathan. They started talking and easily found a common language. Then, the 30-year-old man and the 14-year-old girl exchanged phone numbers and went their separate ways. It would have been clear to any rational person that nothing good would come of this acquaintance. But the adult man, without a second thought, took the teenager's number, disregarding the fact that he had just flirted with a schoolgirl in a public place. Jonathan was not at all concerned that they might be seen. After their first chance meeting on the street, Caitlin and Jonathan continued to communicate by phone. Their relationship developed, and soon they began to consider themselves a couple. Jones treated Caitlin like a little princess, took her to beautiful places, and gave her gifts. The girl, who had never felt desired or loved, had a ton of mental health problems, and was very vulnerable due to her age, liked this very much. Soon, she fell in love with Jonathan because he was the first to show her attention and sincere care. Caitlin wanted to spend all her time with her boyfriend, literally begging him to meet as often as possible. Jonathan, an adult man, easily gave in to the persuasion. He would pick up the schoolgirl in the middle of the night from her foster home and take her to a motel room. It goes without saying what they did behind the closed doors of the room, and even if it was by mutual consent, by law, it was still considered the statutory rape of a minor. So, he and Caitlin had been meeting at the motel for over a year. Caitlin turned 15 and suddenly realized she no longer wanted these meetings, which she directly told her adult boyfriend. But Jonathan began to blackmail her and manipulate the girl emotionally. He threatened to kill himself if she left him. Caitlin was just a teenager and believed everything Jonathan told her. She could not stop the communication, which had suddenly become unpleasant to her. The situation worsened when the man expressed a desire to photograph Caitlin naked. He did this not so much for himself as for the opportunity to make easy money for indecent photos on the darknet. Thus, another crime was added to his list, and from there, everything only got worse. During their meetings at the motel, Jonathan began to show cruelty. He would painfully slap Caitlin and force her to drink alcohol so she would lose control and become more vulnerable. Despite the girl's protests, the man did not stop. Their relationship had been going on for 2 years, and by the end of 2022, the situation reached a critical point. In October, Caitlin ended up in a medical facility due to mental health problems. She was in state custody and undergoing a rehabilitation program. She was strictly forbidden from leaving her ward, but for Jonathan, that didn't matter. One night, Jones came and took Caitlin to a motel. The medical staff, discovering the patient's disappearance, called 911. The police tracked the pair to one of the motels. The missing girl was in a state of severe alcohol intoxication. She was found stumbling near the hotel. Caitlin gave officers a fictitious name and age to avoid punishment, but it didn't work, and Jonathan was arrested. During a search of his phone, numerous indecent images and videos of the minor Caitlin Coons were found, as well as other intimate photos and videos. It soon turned out that the man was selling these photos and videos online for profit, so Jonathan was charged with several counts at once. After being released on bail, he went home to his mother. Naturally, Nicole, Jonathan's mother, was incredibly upset upon learning what her son was accused of. She couldn't understand how he had turned from a quiet, modest youth into a predator who got involved with a teenage girl and mocked her, corrupted her, and then distributed indecent materials on the internet. It was difficult for the woman to accept that her son had fallen into a serious moral crisis. Nicole Jones was in her early 50s. She was described as the kindest and sweetest person you could ever meet. Nicole Jones was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. After graduating from university, she got a job as a nurse at the city hospital. Nicole loved spending time with her family, especially with her nieces and nephews. She enjoyed large family vacations, gardening, attending church, and cooking. At 50, Nicole enjoyed a quiet life, was a homebody, and spent a lot of time creating comfort in her home. She was proud of her home, where she lived with her adult son, Jonathan. His mother always supported him and helped him find peace of mind, especially after the divorce. In 2022, Nicole suddenly learned that her son had committed a crime against a minor. To say she was upset is an understatement. After this incident, the relationship between Nicole and her son deteriorated, and they had serious disagreements. Jonathan was charged with several different counts, including intimate contact with a minor, selling indecent photos and video materials, interference with child custody, and others. A few months later, he pleaded guilty. The sentence was set to be handed down in the spring of 2023. Until that time, Jones was required to wear a GPS ankle tracker and be under house arrest. Also, under the terms of the bail, he was forbidden from contacting Caitlin. However, Jonathan, disregarding the prohibitions, continued to meet with the girl. Since he could no longer freely leave the yard, Caitlin would come to his house herself and sneak into his room. When Nicole found out about this, she was shocked. Caitlin Coons voiced two different versions. First, she said that Jonathan's mother, upon learning of her secret visits to the house, allowed the girl to stay overnight in her son's room a couple of times a week. According to the other version, as soon as Nicole found out that Jonathan and Caitlin were continuing to meet, she kicked them both out of the house. This information is not confirmed, as the minor Caitlin was not a reliable source. Most likely, the truth was somewhere in the middle. Perhaps Nicole forbade the girl from coming to the house, but she did not kick her son out. This continued for several months until February 2023, when Caitlin was in a serious car accident. A month prior, she had celebrated her 17th birthday. Feeling adult enough, the girl got behind the wheel while under the influence of illegal substances. Her car went off the road, and she suffered a severe head injury. Caitlin was hospitalized and placed in a medically induced coma. During treatment, she underwent major surgery, and recovery took a long time. But as soon as Caitlin recovered, she returned to secret meetings with Jonathan despite the court order and house arrest. Nicole Jones had not approved of her son's communication with the teenage girl before, and now she began to voice her indignation openly. Caitlin could think of nothing better than to turn her boyfriend against his mother. She told Jonathan that Nicole was the only person in the world preventing their relationship. Caitlin did not care that her man was already under house arrest, awaiting sentencing for the corruption of a minor. The girl placed all the responsibility for the fact that they had to meet in secret on Jonathan's mother. She literally hated Nicole for allegedly interfering with their love and cloudless happiness. Worst of all, Caitlin began telling Jonathan that Nicole behaved completely inappropriately with him, that her relationship with her son was abnormal, as if the woman not only showed excessive care for her son, but also tried to seduce him. The girl claimed that Nicole was obsessed with Jonathan and wanted a romantic connection between them. Because of this, according to Caitlin, Nicole was preventing them from meeting. This was the most blatant lie imaginable. But unfortunately, Jonathan believed her. Caitlin planted these insane thoughts in Jonathan's head until April 2023. At that time, the still minor girl was placed in a foster family again. But one day, she ran away, jumping out of a window at night, headed straight to Jonathan and hid in his bedroom for 3 days. Nicole had no idea Caitlin was in their house. During all these days and nights, Coons continued to instill in Jonathan that his mother was true evil and wanted to destroy their love. The girl complained that she was tired of this and dreamed of them being together forever. On the 3rd day, Caitlin issued a sick and perverted ultimatum to her boyfriend. They could only be happy together if Jonathan sent his mother to the other world in the name of their love. Caitlin gave her boyfriend only 5 hours to think, and all those 5 hours they argued over the ultimatum. Obviously, Jonathan didn't know how to act correctly. On one hand, the girl managed to convince him that his mother was indeed behaving inappropriately. On the other hand, the life of the woman who gave him life, raised him, and tried to give him the best was on the scale. The man was not ready to get rid of his mother, which very much upset his minor girlfriend. Meanwhile, poor Nicole was going about her normal business in her own home. She didn't even suspect that a brutal crime, a plot to kill her, was being planned in her son's room at that moment. When 5 hours had passed and Jonathan refused to act, a dissatisfied Caitlin gave him another chance to make the right decision. But even after that, the man did not agree. And that was when the girl took matters into her own hands. On April 19th, 2023, Caitlin Coons left the bedroom in her boyfriend's house and went into the garden. There, she found a heavy stone and went into the kitchen where the unsuspecting Nicole was taking food out of the refrigerator. She quietly crept up from behind and, raising the stone in the air, brought it down on the woman's head. Nicole instantly collapsed to the floor, and Caitlin continued to strike again and again. Jonathan was in the living room at that moment, in the room next to the kitchen. He heard everything perfectly, yet he did absolutely nothing to intervene and stop the attack. Despite the fact that the man refused to take his mother's life with his own hands, he just watched as his girlfriend smashed Nicole's head with a stone. Perhaps Jonathan's mother still had some chance of survival, but Caitlin was not going to back down. Tired of swinging the heavy stone, the girl dropped it and began to strangle Nicole with her hands. Unfortunately, the weakened 53-year-old woman could not resist. She was completely defenseless before the aggressive young girl. Nicole Jones's terrible death at the hands of 17-year-old Caitlin Coons was completely senseless. It happened suddenly, without any reason. And what's even worse, the son Nicole loved more than anything in the world allowed it to happen. Jonathan did not intervene or stop his girlfriend. After the murder, Jonathan went outside and smoked a cigarette, simply not knowing what to do next. He completely disconnected from the stressful situation and stood there in a daze until Caitlin approached him and assured him everything would be fine. Together, they developed a plan to avoid punishment for the crime. First, the couple went to a local store where they bought a tarp and trash bags. Their shopping trip was captured by surveillance cameras. Then, Jonathan and Caitlin returned home, wrapped Nicole's body in plastic, and put it in the trunk of her own car. They drove the corpse to a nearby apartment complex and threw it into communal trash containers. Jonathan was still wearing the GPS ankle tracker, and all his movements were tracked. After disposing of the body, the pair returned to the house, went through Nicole's things, and took everything valuable: a gun, jewelry, a checkbook, and some documents. Then they went and withdrew all the money from her bank account. The lovers went on the run in Nicole's stolen car. Caitlin, recording a video on her cell phone, held a gun and laughed wildly. To an outsider, it looked as if she were still on a high from the murder she committed. Jonathan remained silent, in shock from his own weakness. He cut the GPS tracker off his leg and threw it out the window. The pair headed for Mexico to cross the border and lie low. 2 weeks passed. By that time, no one had noticed that Nicole Jones had disappeared. The lovers reached the Mexican border and could have easily disappeared into another country. But Caitlin suddenly did something that completely turned the case upside down. What she did made no sense. The girl, in an excited state, decided to inform one of her foster parents about the crime she committed. Perhaps she wanted to laugh in the faces of the people who had given her shelter and care, or she was simply under the influence of illegal substances. It is unknown why Caitlin, who had almost crossed the Mexican border and could have escaped justice, decided to play games with her foster family. She likely felt her own impunity and wanted to brag to someone. Who knows what was going through her head at that moment? The worried foster parents knew about Caitlin's relationship with Jonathan and the court order against him. Now they were worried the man might have kidnapped the girl because Jones had not shown up for his scheduled sentencing court date. He was still under house arrest. It had been only a few months since the man pleaded guilty to all charges against him regarding the minor Coons. The foster family contacted the sheriff's office and reported Caitlin missing. On May 5th, 2023, 2 weeks after Nicole's death, police arrived at the Jones home. However, the house was empty. Neither Jonathan nor Caitlin nor Nicole was there. The craziest thing was that detectives considered the minor girl the primary victim. They weren't as worried about Nicole's disappearance as they were about Caitlin's. Police were sure Jonathan had kidnapped the schoolgirl. To bring her home safe and sound, Jones was put on an international wanted list. As soon as the fugitives' faces appeared on the news, the couple had to hide, and a brilliant idea visited Caitlin's head. She tried to claim through social media that she was fine, that she wasn't on the run, and that she should be left alone rather than saved. The girl published a post saying she was in Ohio and would soon turn 18, so she didn't have to answer to anyone. Caitlin wrote that she didn't know any Jonathan, that she was just enjoying life, and people shouldn't interfere. It seems she posted a few more times. After that, she began posting her old videos, pretending everything was great. Caitlin failed to consider that the videos were dated, and now everyone understood she was lying. On May 8th, a day after the social media posts and 3 days after police visited the Jones home, Jonathan and Caitlin were spotted at the Mexican border. According to the police report, they were driving a 2021 Buick Encore belonging to Nicole, and they had her social security card, ID, credit cards, and medical insurance card. During the interrogation, the man refused to say anything, but the girl, during a 2-hour interrogation, told all the details of her crime. She confessed to hitting Nicole several times in the head with a stone and then strangling her. Her boyfriend was sickened when he saw his mother's dead body. When Jonathan caught his breath, they cleaned the house with cleaning supplies, packed Nicole's body in trash bags and a tarp, and then took it to a trash container nearby. The schoolgirl mentioned that her boyfriend was so terrified that he couldn't even touch the corpse, and the girl had to throw Nicole's body into the container herself. After that, Jonathan removed the GPS tracker, and they went on the run. For most of the way, the man tried to come to his senses. He could not accept that his mother was dead. To try and organize his thoughts, Jonathan used weed. Because of this, they had problems when they tried to enter Mexico. What the 17-year-old girl told detectives was horrifying, not only for its brutality, but for its cold-blooded cynicism. The stone, the blow to the back, the strangulation, and then the routine disposal of the body and flight on stolen money, like in a cheap crime novel. The lovers tried to remove a person twice, first physically, and then by throwing the remains into a dump, literally turning them into waste. In her defense, Caitlin told police that the woman had behaved inappropriately and showed anything but maternal feelings toward her son, flirting with him and wanting to seduce him. This was supposedly the reason for the killing. However, everything said was an absolute lie. The true reason was that at some point, Caitlin became obsessed with Jonathan and wanted to remove all possible obstacles from her path. One of them turned out to be Nicole. After the confession, Jonathan Jones and Caitlin Coons were arrested on charges of attacking 53-year-old Nicole Jones, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Jonathan showed himself to be absolute evil, a predator who allowed his own mother's life to be taken without even trying to protect her. He started a romance with a minor, which exacerbated his guilt. Caitlin, whom everyone initially considered a victim, became a criminal herself, cold-bloodedly killing an innocent woman. Police began an investigation, but 3 weeks had already passed since the death. While authorities were looking for the fugitives, the trash container with the woman's body had already been taken to a landfill. The searches were unsuccessful, and Nicole's remains were never found. The family of the deceased woman is now forced to experience emptiness and horror for the rest of their lives, knowing that the body of their loved one was never laid to rest. It is still rotting somewhere under a pile of trash. Jonathan and Caitlin were in custody awaiting trial. The girl tried to defend herself by blaming everything on her adult boyfriend. But now, authorities saw her not as that innocent teenage girl thrown from one foster family to another, but as a young woman who turned emotional pain into a murder weapon and buried her future forever. They decided to try Coons as an adult, even though she was only 17 at the time of the crime. Even before the case reached trial, both Jonathan and Caitlin pleaded guilty and were sentenced to life imprisonment. They both must spend at least 25 years behind bars before they have the opportunity to petition for parole. This is not a story about love. It is a story about power, manipulation, and a point of no return that was crossed by two people whose connection was a sentence from the very beginning. The story of Caitlin Coons and Jonathan Jones is a grim reminder. Some wounds do not heal. They only fester until they poison everything around them. The only thing justice could do was send these unhealthy patients to a lifetime of quarantine. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video. When they tell you that monsters don't exist, remember the story of Vera Jo Regal, a girl whose mind was forever frozen in childhood and whose heart craved love so much that she didn't notice how she ended up in a trap. Behind the door of an ordinary house in the state of Ohio, she was awaited by a woman nicknamed Sugar Baby, a mother of 9 children who collected infants and skillfully turned people into slaves. This is the sad story of Vera Jo Regal. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Vera Jo Regal was incredibly vulnerable due to her intellectual disabilities. She was very easy to manipulate. The girl lived in one of the most disgusting families, where she was accompanied by physical and sexual abuse, verbal insults, and bullying. This family was led by a woman named Sherry Brooks, a kind of Charles Manson in a skirt. The Brooks family was also involved in cult activities led by Sherry. Sherry Brooks was born on November 3, 1962, in Findlay, Ohio. From a very early age, she was subjected to abuse by her own father, Chuck, who brutally treated both the heirs and their mother. Chuck called Sherry Sugar Baby. Most horrifyingly, she liked this nickname and used it for herself when she became an adult. Sherry's mother, Charlotte, knew about her daughter's suffering but never did anything about it. When Sherry turned 3, the state took her away from her parents and placed her in a foster home. Until the age of 16, the girl was moved from one set of foster parents to another. History is silent about what happened to Sherry during those years. It is known that she did not become happy in any family, did not feel sincere care and warmth, and did not find stability. At 16, Sherry left the foster family where she spent her last months and returned to her mother, who had simply stood aside when her father abused her daughter in childhood. An even more disturbing fact was that Chuck himself lived nearby. He had divorced his wife but continued to visit her periodically. Upon learning that his sugar baby had settled in her mother's house, the man began to visit more often, wanting to get close to his daughter again. But the feelings he had for her were by no means fatherly. Chuck said that Sherry was his favorite and that he would do anything she wanted. However, his words sounded false, with a hint, because he pursued his own perverted goals. The terrible thing was that Sherry liked such attention from her father. She was ready for anything to earn Chuck's favor, to give him pleasure, even if it involved sexual abuse. She was pleased that at least someone was interested in her. Shortly after Sherry left her foster parents, an important thing happened. For some strange reason, the girl decided that someone had stolen her child. She repeatedly told her mother that while she was in a foster home, she got pregnant and allegedly gave birth to a little girl, and then someone stole her. In the end, no one stole her child. It was all a lie. The truth was that another girl, who also lived in the foster home, gave birth to a daughter, and Cherie, a pathological liar, lived in a world of fantasies and made up this story in the hope of stealing the baby. Fortunately, she did not succeed. However, subsequently, as an adult, Sherry repeatedly had obsessive ideas about kidnapping minors. When Sherry turned 18, she entered into an incestuous relationship with her maternal cousin, Daniel Bixler Sr., who suffered from mental retardation. Apparently, the family did not consider this romance shameful and jokingly called Sherry and Daniel kissing cousins. Soon the girl became pregnant and gave birth to a son whom she named Scotty. Scotty became the first of Sherry Brooks' 9 children. It can be said with certainty that Sherry's life went wrong from birth. But with age, everything only got worse, because gradually she herself turned into a monster. Shortly after the birth of her son, she began to subject him to abuse. Sherry completely repeated the behavior of her biological father, Chuck. Eventually, authorities became aware of the young woman's inappropriate behavior toward her son. He was taken from the family and given to Sherry's mother, Charlotte, to be raised, who was unlikely to be a better guardian than her own daughter. The most outrageous thing in this story is that Sherry did not face any punishment for abusing Scotty. She wasn't even threatened with a fine or public condemnation. The craziest part is that Sherry continued to be allowed to see her son, although she clearly could not be trusted with a child. In March 1982, shortly after Scotty was placed in his grandmother's care, Sherry broke up with her cousin and entered a new relationship with a man named Michael Mullaney. They got married a few weeks after meeting and began living together. Soon, Sherry became pregnant again, and they had a son named Joshua. Although Child Protective Services knew perfectly well that the woman had abused her first son, she was allowed to keep the second without extra questions. Overall, the family lived in terrible conditions, in a dirty trailer where unsanitary conditions prevailed. No one ever cleaned there. Joshua crawled on the sticky floor among scraps, mold, and food packaging. He was rarely bathed, his clothes were almost never changed, and he was poorly fed. Although Sherry was entitled to free baby food, she was too lazy and didn't want to go get it. Instead, she fed the infant cow's milk, which could cause stomach problems. By the time Joshua was 3 months old, his health left much to be desired. He already had stomach problems, cried constantly, and didn't sleep at night. Pediatricians repeatedly told Cherie that she should not feed her son cow's milk, but she continued to do so. The problem was that cow's milk contains a lot of protein, which a newborn's liver cannot yet process. But Cherie didn't care at all, and Child Protective Services, apparently, didn't either. Joshua was constantly nauseous and had stomach pains. Because of this, he didn't sleep at night and cried incessantly. Joshua's father, Michael, once got so angry at his son for crying that he hit him in the face, cursed him, and threw him onto the sofa. Sherry just sat there at that moment and did nothing. Likely, the man repeatedly abused Joshua. However, that time when Michael behaved aggressively, another family member was in the trailer who turned out to be a decent person and immediately reported the abuse to Child Protective Services. In December 1983, little Joshua was immediately taken from the home and placed under protection. The father and mother were accused of inappropriate behavior and neglect of parental duties. During interrogation, Cherie admitted that Michael had hit her and Joshua several times because the child made Mike lose his temper. The woman stated that she never intervened in the parenting process. Cherie and Michael remained under the supervision of Child Protective Services, possibly in hopes that they could change their lives and regain custody. However, they did nothing, and Joshua remained under the care of Hancock Child Protective Services forever. Fortunately for the child, he was adopted and was able to grow up under a different name. Joshua was the second child taken from Cherie, but the woman did not stop there. She did not give up hope of producing offspring. In 1984, 22-year-old Sherry became pregnant by Michael again, and they had another son, Michael Jr. The same story repeated with the third son. Child Protective Services received a report of abuse and neglect of parental duties when Michael Jr. was only a few months old. The boy was taken from the dysfunctional family. This was already the third child in a row that Cherie had lost. Everyone around understood that she was simply incapable of caring for children, everyone except herself. After 3 children were taken from her, in early 1986, she became pregnant again and this time gave birth to a girl, her 4th child. The baby, named Maria, was Cherie's first daughter. The mother's behavior toward the infant was completely different. She adored her little princess. Maria was the light of her life. According to friends and relatives, Cherie was obsessed with her daughter. She finally cleaned her trailer. It became surprisingly clean and tidy. Cherie dressed Maria in clean clothes, carefully monitored her hygiene, fed her correctly, and cared for her daughter with special warmth. The woman did not allow anyone to hold her daughter. If anyone even approached Maria, Cherie gave a disapproving look. This was very different from how she behaved with her sons. But there were reasons for everything. Things were looking up, but with the birth of her daughter, the cycle of violence in Cherie's home did not stop. One day in the spring of 1987, Maria was rushed to the hospital. She was brought by her grandmother. The girl had vaginal bleeding, and it turned out that she had been subjected to repeated abuse by her own mother. Cherie wouldn't let anyone near her daughter because she was afraid the child would be taken away. She felt a kind of unhealthy attachment to the girl and wanted to keep her for her own perverted fantasies. That night, Maria was examined and returned to her parents' custody, while the doctor contacted the police and spoke about his suspicions. Cherie didn't yet understand what was going on until law enforcement officers came to her house. The woman hurriedly tried to hide her daughter and refused to tell the officers where she was. But it didn't take much time for the police to figure out where the mother had put the child. 1-year-old Maria was immediately taken from Cherie's custody. In desperation, Cherie tried to steal someone else's child. The baby's name was Vera Jo Regal. She was only 6 months old and was the daughter of a neighbor, a woman named Verna. After Maria was taken from Cherie, she began to spend a lot of time with the baby living next door, trying to replace the girl's biological mother. It was eerie because Cherie acted as if Vera were her own child. Eventually, Verna got tired of this behavior and forbade the neighbor from seeing her daughter. But Cherie was not going to give up. She planned to kidnap the little neighbor because she wanted her for herself. Fortunately, Verna managed to protect the child from the obsessive care. Experiencing disappointment, Cherie could think of nothing better than to get pregnant for the 5th time. She again gave birth to a girl, whom she named Little Cherie. Despite all previous cases of ill treatment of offspring, the woman was again allowed to keep the newborn. The story repeated. The mother was obsessed with her daughter. At 6 months old, Little Cherie was taken by Protective Services. Thus, the 24-year-old woman had already lost 5 of her children. Subsequently, neither Joshua, nor Maria, nor little Cherie ever saw their biological mother again. In the following years, many changes occurred in Cherie's life. She divorced her husband Michael and married Kevin Lee Brooks. They came to the house that soon became known as the House of Horrors. Little is known about what the negligent mother was doing all that time. But when Cherie turned 28, she became pregnant again and gave birth to a boy, whom she named after her husband, Kevin Lee Punky Brooks Jr. Unlike her other sons, whom she completely neglected, Punky became special to her. Cherie cared for him like a girl. She bathed him and dressed him in clean clothes. She did everything a mother is supposed to do. The sixth son became the first child they didn't take from Cherie's custody. This did not mean that the woman suddenly realized all her mistakes and turned into an ideal mother. Brooks simply learned to better cover her tracks. In the following years, Cherie gave birth to 3 more children, and they all stayed with her. She was still cruel and inattentive to her offspring, but successfully hid it from the authorities. So, in June 1992, Cherie's 7th son, Zachary, was born. A year later, in July 1993, the 8th son, Garth, was born. And finally, the last child of Cherie Brooks was Chuck, born in 1997. The woman raised the sons, but did not feel happy because she had always dreamed of a daughter. The sons caused her irritation and dissatisfaction. Cherie made plans to change the situation. She acted slowly but surely. Over the next 10 years, Punky, Zachary, Garth, and Chuck grew up, entering their teenage period. During this time, the Brooks family gained a bad reputation in the local community, and people began to avoid them. They were stuck with the reputation of bullies and manipulators who terrorized their neighbors, constantly creating problems for them. Cherie herself earned a bad name throughout the city. It was later revealed that Brooks became involved in the distribution of illicit substances. She practically headed her own small criminal group, teaching her 4 sons to go against the law. Cherie introduced herself to everyone as Sugar Baby, the eerie nickname her father once gave her. She was so domineering and so skillfully manipulated those around her that some compared her to Charles Manson. Cherie created a cult of personality within her own family, where everyone unquestioningly obeyed her will. The mother of many ruled with an iron fist, and everyone feared her and tried to please her. It's no wonder that her 4 sons became a real nightmare for the neighbors. The eldest son, Punky, was incredibly cruel. He beat people on the street for no reason, just to show his power. He was also involved in dealing illicit drugs and was known as the town bully. Punky told everyone he was a member of the Crips gang, although this was likely just an additional way to intimidate. The guy did everything so that people would fear him, and Punky was the only person his mother feared. The 3 other sons were no better, cruel manipulators involved in criminal activity. The Brooks family was becoming a source of trouble for those around them. Normal people didn't want to communicate with them and stayed away. Be that as it may, Cherie still could not rest because of the fact that she didn't have a daughter. And she came up with a diabolical plan. Brooks wanted her teenage sons to provide her with a girl themselves. At that time, the 3 eldest boys were between 13 and 16 years old, and Cherie began to pressure them all into unprotected intimacy. She found them girlfriends herself, because each of the girls had to get Cherie's approval. At the same time, all the candidates were vulnerable and insecure teenagers who were easy to manipulate. Punky got a girlfriend named Heather. The 3rd eldest son, Garth, had a girlfriend named Gina. Cherie insisted that the guys bring their girlfriends to their house and engage in unprotected intimacy with them. The mother herself was outside the room and literally directed the whole process. Eventually, Punky's girlfriend Heather got pregnant, and Cherie was on cloud 9, hoping she would have a granddaughter. But unfortunately for her, Heather gave birth to a boy, which unusually angered Cherie. Life was hard for the young mother. According to friends and relatives, Punky was the boss of the house. Despite this, Cherie loved her son until he was taken away, but this time not by Child Protective Services. In July 2010, Punky and his girlfriend, Heather, were heading to a place to buy illicit substances. They were walking along the side of the road when a car driver, exceeding the speed limit, accidentally hit the guy. Punky was taken from the scene to the hospital, where he subsequently died. Sherry was informed of what happened about 20 minutes after Punky was taken by ambulance. By the time she rushed to her son, he was no longer alive. Despite the circumstances of the accident, the mother blamed Heather for everything. That night, Punky was walking closer to the roadway when he was hit by the car. Sherry believed the girlfriend had intentionally pushed her boyfriend under the wheels. Brooks convinced everyone that Heather had paid the driver to intentionally run over Punky. The grief-stricken mother didn't care about facts. She just wanted to take her anger out on someone, and that someone turned out to be the deceased son's girlfriend. Sherry wanted revenge and did not hesitate. During the memorial service at their home, she talked a relative into beating up Heather. As a result, the girl's nose was broken and her face was severely mutilated. Saying goodbye, Sherry shouted at her, "This is what you get for messing with my family and sending my son to the other world." Sherry cremated Punky's body, but instead of burying or scattering his ashes, she put the urn on a shelf in her living room. She added one of his t-shirts, some of his gang paraphernalia, and even left room for his favorite chocolate bars. It became a kind of home memorial. The woman only calmed down when Gina, the 15-year-old girlfriend of her other son Garth, got pregnant. An ultrasound showed she was going to have a girl. As soon as Sherry found out, she took charge of Gina, following her everywhere and completely controlling her life. She tormented the girl by claiming that this baby belonged only to her. Sherry was domineering and treated Gina poorly. One day, she realized what a mistake she had made moving into the Brooks house and decided she had had enough. She packed her things and got ready to leave. But before she could do so, she suffered a miscarriage. Sherry blamed Garth's girlfriend for everything because she had once again lost the opportunity to get a baby girl. And now Brooks was busy searching for a companion for the second eldest son. As a girlfriend for Zachary, Sherry chose a girl named Vera Jo Regal. This was the same baby girl Brooks had once tried to steal from her neighbor. And now, all these years later, Sherry finally found a way to bring her into her home. During her short life, Vera went through many hardships. As a child, the girl was diagnosed with various intellectual disabilities, including ADHD. Her IQ was significantly below average. Vera's developmental age was much lower than her actual age. As a teenager, she behaved like an 8-year-old child. From a young age, Vera was repeatedly subjected to sexual and physical abuse. The source of many of her sufferings was her own father, who subjected her to abuse starting from the age of 11. Although the man was eventually sentenced to 20 years in prison, his crime had already caused irreparable damage to Vera's fragile psyche. The girl with mental retardation had almost no hope for a bright future, because the abuse was continued by her mother's new boyfriend. Despite all the difficulties, the girl tried to study as best she could. She had many friends and hobbies. Most of all, she loved country music and handmade jewelry. One day on the street, Vera ran into her former neighbor, Sherry Brooks. She told her a funny story about how she once intended to steal a little girl from her parents, whom she loved with all her heart, and that girl turned out to be Vera Jo Regal. The former acquaintances laughed and parted on a friendly note. Sherry realized that Vera was the ideal victim because she was vulnerable and easy to manipulate. She decided that she had found the perfect girlfriend for her 13-year-old son Zachary and gradually pulled the girl into her perverted world. Shortly after finishing school, Vera Jo Regal, not without Sherry's help, became friends with Zachary Brooks. At first, the young people were just dating, but 2 years later, their relationship grew romantic. Vera became part of the Brooks family and moved into their house. Sherry began to prepare Vera for the fact that she must give Zachary a child. The woman completely subordinated the new victim and began to manipulate her. Brooks had diabetes, which caused her severe pain in her legs. Additionally, the woman suffered from excess weight and was confined to a wheelchair. Very soon, Vera was doing all the housework because Sherry herself could not fully handle the chores. Though she could give orders, the girl was happy to serve the person who cared for her and joyfully carried out all instructions. She gave Sherry foot massages, tidied the rooms, and even dealt illicit substances at Brooks' request. Eventually, Sherry learned that Vera received disability benefits and convinced the girl to give all the money to her as rent for living there. Vera again joyfully agreed, as due to her mental health problems, she simply did not understand she was being manipulated. She likely saw motherly care in Sherry's behavior, a person who took her in and was kind to her. About a year later, Vera was completely isolated from the outside world. Her mobile phone was taken away, and she was forbidden from visiting relatives. Sherry said that her mother wanted nothing to do with her, and the girl believed her. If Vera left the house and met one of her old acquaintances, she would secretly wave a hand in greeting and immediately turn away before Sherry noticed. This continued for several more years. Brooks was not in a hurry, playing the long game with Vera. She manipulated the girl and brainwashed her for years. Everything was aggravated by the fact that Regal's parents moved to another city, and Vera now depended entirely on Sherry. She had no one who could help her. Zachary turned 16. The guy, like Vera, had developmental problems and suffered from a personality disorder. Therefore, it was easy for Sherry to direct them both. Soon, Brooks got what she wanted. 22-year-old Vera got pregnant by 16-year-old Zachary. Sherry immediately informed the future parents that if they had a girl, she would keep her for herself, and Vera would not have the right to see her own child. Brooks backed up her intentions with actions. She accompanied the pregnant woman to all doctor appointments, independently chose baby clothes, furniture, and everything else. Sherry even took responsibility for choosing the name for the child, Welladian. Behind this name was a specific meaning, a combination of the name of Vera's biological father, whose name was Willard, and the middle name of Sherry's biological father, Dean. Both men had subjected their daughters to sexual abuse, and Brooks wanted to immortalize their names by naming her own granddaughter that way. As the birth approached, Sherry became increasingly domineering and unstable. Vera was no more than an incubator for the child to her. In September, Sherry told Zachary that he needed to give up parental rights to the girl and transfer them to her. He agreed, and naturally, they did not process any official papers. By the end of October, another idea occurred to Brooks. Her birthday was November 3rd, and Welladian was supposed to be born in December. The woman decided to give herself a gift and speed up the baby's arrival into the world. Castor oil had been used as a homeopathic remedy for centuries. In particular, it was used to induce labor. Only a couple of tablespoons were required. An overdose could cause a range of side effects: stomach pain, bleeding, and the like. Sherry bought 3 bottles, and on November 3rd, mixing the oil with orange juice, forced Vera to drink this cocktail. Vera became very ill. She started having contractions, just as Brooks hoped. However, everything turned out not quite as Sherry wanted. The child was born 6 weeks early, on November 4th, and not the 3rd, as the woman dreamed. Baby Welladian was born premature, with a very low weight. She had difficulty breathing and developed heart problems. The girl had to spend several weeks in intensive care, and all this happened only because Sherry wanted the child's birthday to coincide with her own. Fortunately or not, Welladian pulled through. Vera took her daughter home. She was proud of her girl and happy in the role of a young mom. However, Sherry considered the baby hers, snatched the child from the mother's hands, and took her to her room. Zachary, the girl's father, was nearby, but he didn't care about his daughter, as he himself was essentially still a teenager. For the first few months, Vera tried to take care of her daughter herself, but she was not allowed to interact with Welladian, let alone hold her. This irritated Sherry, and she began to insult and humiliate Vera in every way, inciting her sons to beat her up. If not for the disability benefit, Welladian's mother would have been kicked out to the 4 winds long ago, but Sherry did not want to lose the free money. Continuing to live in that house was Vera's biggest mistake. Over 2 years, the police were called to the Brookses 10 times due to allegations of domestic violence. Vera was questioned several times by officers, but out of fear of Sherry and her sons, the girl refused to say anything bad about them. Vera insisted every time that she liked living with them and wanted to stay. Despite limited intellectual abilities and clear signs of abuse, authorities considered Vera capable of making her own decisions. In fact, the conditions in which the Brookses lived were horrifying. They had no plumbing. They used a bucket for a toilet. As pets, they kept a dog and a pig in the house, which defecated right indoors. No one cleaned the rooms, so cockroaches were scurrying everywhere. Such an environment was not at all suitable for newborn Welladian. but because Sherry was considered Vera's guardian and Zachary had legal rights to his daughter, Protective Services did not take the baby. After Weladine's birth, Zachary broke up with Vera for good. He no longer wanted to be her boyfriend. Vera was upset, as she was very sensitive and suffered from any pain, and Sherry found it amusing. She liked to watch others suffer. Now Brooks completely isolated Vera from the outside world, convincing her that she was needed by no one but them, that even her own mother had abandoned her daughter, moved to another city, and forgotten about her. The incredibly vulnerable girl believed everything she was told. She lacked the strength and the mind to stand up for herself. Intellectually, she was still a child. Additionally, Sherry forbade Vera to leave the house without permission, turning her into a prisoner. The abuse was constantly intensifying. Food restrictions became the next punishment. While the rest of the family sat at the table, Vera had to eat on the floor like an animal. She was given dinner leftovers and moldy food from the trash bin. She was kept in disgusting conditions, locked in a cold room with a broken window. She slept on a dirty, smelly mattress, soaked in animal urine and feces. Beatings continued daily. Sherry forced her sons to punish Vera physically if she approached Weladine, or she herself took a stick and thrashed the girl. Vera did not resist. She only curled into a ball and repeated, "Sorry, sorry, sorry." She was 24 years old, but developmentally she was around 8 years old, and believed she herself deserved such treatment. Authorities knew about what was happening. Protective Services visited several times to check on Weladine's condition. They saw the environment of the house in which the young mother lived with the child, but for some reason took no action. One day in early 2011, exhausted Vera, who hadn't eaten anything for 3 days, was at home alone. At least, that's what she thought. The girl went into the living room, where the urn with Punky's ashes stood, and noticed a chocolate bar lying next to it. She grabbed the candy and immediately ate it, not quite understanding what she was doing. Vera hoped no one had noticed her, but that was a mistake. It turned out that Gina, the girlfriend of Garth, one of Sherry's sons, was in the house. After the miscarriage incident, Gina had lost the favor of her boyfriend's mother and was still desperately trying to make amends. Hoping to regain Sherry's trust, Gina told her that Vera had eaten the candy bar lying on Punky's shrine. After such insolence, Sherry lost her temper. She saw in Vera's behavior an attempt to devalue her power in the house. As punishment for the transgression, Brooks ordered her sons Zachary and Chuck to beat the brazen girl half to death. In the end, as a memory of the eaten candy bar, Vera was left with a broken nose, bruises under her eyes, and abrasions all over her body. But this was not the only punishment, because Sherry planned something worse. Although the Brooks family home could not be called huge, a crowd of people lived there. First and foremost, it was Sherry and her husband Kevin Lee Brooks, who did not participate in the abuse, but simply stood aside and watched what was happening. Then Vera and her 1-year-old daughter, Weladine, and Sherry's 3 youngest sons, Zachary, Chuck, and Garth, with his girlfriend Gina. Let's not forget that the negligent mother had other children. They grew up, and 2 of them returned to Sherry. It was the very first son, Scotty, whom Brooks gave birth to from her cousin, and her 3rd son, Michael Jr. Michael's girlfriend Shannon also spent a lot of time in this house. Also living in the house was 21-year-old Danny Bixler, the 2nd son of the cousin with whom Sherry had a relationship, and his girlfriend, 17-year-old Nicole Peters. Danny and Nicole first met when both were in a juvenile detention center. Nicole was obsessed with Danny, following him everywhere like a little lost puppy. For him, she was ready for anything. In Sherry Brooks's house, Danny was hiding from the police. He had violated the terms of his probation, and now he faced arrest. Bixler was a hardened criminal, and Nicole was a sadist who joyfully joined in the bullying of Vera, always with a smile on her face. Danny found a hanging metal padlock, attached it to the end of a belt, and began to lash Vera with this construction again and again. He hit her on the head so that the girl's face was covered in blood. At first, Nicole just watched, and then she herself began to join the beating, landing punches to Vera's face. Danny's girlfriend accused Vera of wanting to seduce her boyfriend, which naturally was not true. Beating an innocent victim caused sexual arousal in the couple, and they often paused to be alone. This happened every single day. Other members of the Brooks family said that Vera could no longer be considered human. Due to constant fear, she was withdrawn, silent, and could barely get up from the floor due to her injuries. When little Welladine grew up, Cherie began to lose interest in her and wanted another child. She started to pressure Zachary and Garth to force another girl to get pregnant, and categorically did not want Vera to be the mother. She didn't want Vera present in their lives at all anymore. Danny Bixler and Cherie's late son Punky both claimed to be in the Crips gang. The guys were close and very attached to each other. Cherry had blamed his girlfriend Heather for Punky's tragic death, but now a crazy idea came into Brooks' head: to frame the Vera Jo Regal she was tired of as the guilty one. The woman knew that Danny dreamed of avenging Punky's death, so she told the guy that it was Vera who was with him that evening, and that it was she who pushed the boyfriend under the car. Of course, this was another lie, as Cherie often made up tall tales. But when Danny heard this, he flew into a rage. He needed to vent his resentment for his gang comrade Punky on someone, and Vera was perfect for the role of the object of revenge. On March 24th, 2011, the Brooks family decided to punish Vera for Punky's death. Chuck, Zachary, and Garth knew this wasn't true, that the girl had nothing to do with the brothers' passing, but they needed a pretext to justify their cruel actions. Cherie ordered Vera to be stripped first and then beaten by everyone at once. Brooks' three youngest sons, as well as Danny and Nicole, participated in the attack. The other family members just sat and watched, acting as spectators. At some point, Danny pulled out a knife and stabbed Vera in the leg. Cherie found this funny. Laughing, she approached the girl lying on the floor and stuck a finger into the puncture wound. The situation escalated even more when Cherie forced her 14-year-old son, Chuck, to bring dog feces from outside. Vera was forced to eat the excrement, after which she vomited. But then Cherie forced her to eat it again. To finally humiliate the victim, she was subjected to abuse with a plunger and a toothbrush. It is quite obvious that no one in this family considered Vera a human being. Lately, Cherie had often joked about needing to get rid of Vera. She had a clear plan on how to avoid punishment. Brooks considered herself invulnerable because she had gotten away with everything before. Cherie was inspired by an incident that happened a couple of years ago when her nephew died under the wheels of a train. It was an accident, and now the woman wanted everything with Vera to look exactly the same. Brooks jokingly said that they should drug Regal with sleeping pills and force her to lie on the railroad tracks not far from the house. The train would not have time to brake and would crush the body, tearing it to pieces and destroying the evidence. At the same time, Cherie did not want to act herself, but preferred that someone else send Vera to the other world. Zachary, Vera's ex-boyfriend and father of Welladine, volunteered, but Cherie did not want any of her sons involved in the crime. Instead, she talked Danny Bixler into taking revenge on Vera for Punky's end, and the guy, along with his girlfriend Nicole, agreed to finish off the innocent girl. The events of the evening of March 26, 2011, remained not fully clarified. Everyone who was somehow involved in what was happening had their own version, but the result was the same. Danny and Nicole forced Vera to put on shoes and go for a walk with them. Barely alive after the beatings, the girl did not want to go, resisted, and screamed. But Danny threatened to smash her head against the porch if she didn't obey, so she simply had no choice. Leaving the house, Vera said to Cherie as she was closing the door, "Good night, sugar baby." These were her last words, after which she left accompanied by Danny Bixler and his girlfriend, Nicole Peters. Even in the last moments of her life, Vera treated the woman who had taken her in well, calling her by the name the mistress of the house so adored. The couple led the girl to the railroad tracks near their house, where they stabbed her several times until the blade became so dull it could no longer penetrate clothing. Danny and Nicole forced Vera to strip naked and continued to stab her in various parts of the body. Danny stabbed her in the legs so Vera couldn't run, and then grabbed her from behind, put a knife to her neck, and slit her throat from ear to ear. When the victim finally stopped resisting, they laid her across the railroad tracks so that her head would end up directly under the wheels of a moving train, and left, leaving her to die alone. The murder weapon, the knife, They threw into a nearby lake, and they themselves went to a friend's house to celebrate the successfully committed crime. Incredibly, Vera was still alive. She was barely clinging to life. But still, obeying instincts, she crawled off the rails and tucked her legs in. When the horn of an approaching train sounded, she was lying on the tracks naked in the fetal position. Unfortunately, due to her injuries, Vera Jo Regal no longer heard the clatter of the wheels. She passed away. Maybe in the last moments of her life, Vera thought about her daughter, whom she left in the hands of monsters. When the train approached, it could not stop in time. It seemed to the engineer that he saw a deer carcass on the tracks. The man was shocked to find a human body instead of an animal. The distance between Vera's body and the underside of the train was only a few centimeters. And although the train did not cause her any damage, by that time, she was already dead. It was the victim's last actions that helped solve the crime. It immediately became clear to detectives called to the scene that the victim received her wounds somewhere other than under the wheels of the train. When Vera crawled off the rails, she ruined Sherry's perfect plan. One of the police officers immediately recognized Vera, whom he had seen more than once at the Brooks' house. When detectives came to their home and reported that Vera Jo Regal had passed away, Sherry tried to portray despair. She immediately made up a story that the girl had supposedly met some strange black guy and ran away from home. According to the woman's assurances, he was the one involved in her ward's death. Fortunately, it did not take long for investigators to find out the truth. After the massacre, Danny Bixler, although he justified his attack on Vera, was still shocked by what had happened. He got very drunk and confessed everything to his sister, and Tanya, without thinking, called the police and told them about her brother's transgression. Nicole and Danny were immediately arrested. Danny Bixler almost immediately admitted guilt and also reported Nicole's role, although the girl herself at first declared her non-involvement in Vera's death. Then, Nicole Peters still confessed to the crime and told the police that the inspirer and instigator of everything was Sherry Brooks. In the end, the couple reached a plea deal with the investigation. Danny was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the slaughter of Vera Jo Regal, and Nicole to 23 years for complicity. The court took into account that at the time of the crime, Peters was a minor. She was only 17 years old. Zachary Brooks, Vera's ex-boyfriend and father of baby Welladine, was accused of obstruction of justice and sentenced to only 4 years in prison. Michael, Sherry's third son, was also accused of obstruction of justice and sentenced to 30 days in jail with 5 years of probation. His pregnant girlfriend Shannon took a plea deal and got off with a suspended sentence. Another of Sherry's sons, Garth, was accused of obstruction of justice and fined. The youngest, Chuck, at the time of sentencing was already serving time in a juvenile correctional facility for truancy. The judge sentenced him to a rehabilitation program. The guy was released shortly before his 18th birthday. The police checked all family members who could have been involved in the abuse of Vera, but no charges were ever brought against anyone. Sherry Brooks, the head of the family and, essentially, the organizer of the crime, once again managed to escape responsibility. Vera Jo Regal was a victim not only of specific people, but also of a system that knew about what was happening in the Brooks house, but could not protect a vulnerable girl. Based on this horrific story, a documentary film was made called Goodnight, Sugar Baby. In it, Sherry and other members of the Brooks family discuss Vera's death on camera. In one of the clips, Sherry was going to say something compromising, and one of her sons clamped his hand over his mother's mouth so she wouldn't blurt it out. After Vera Jo Regal's passing, many members of the Brooks family spent time in prison for various crimes. In 2015, Sherry was sentenced to 40 months in prison for illicit substance trafficking. Zachary Brooks met another woman and in 2015 became the father of another child. He was arrested in 2020 and sent to prison on charges of receiving stolen property and robbery. The man was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He was due to be released from prison in November 2024. The Brooks family, with the exception of Danny Bixler and Nicole Peters, remains in the same house in Findlay, Ohio, where this terrible story took place. Rumor has it that the head of the family, Sherry Brooks, passed away in 2021, but this information is not confirmed. The only positive moment is that little Welladine was taken from the Brooks home and given up for adoption. Since then, the girl has lived in a loving family. The day after the massacre, police searched the riverbank and found Vera Jo Regel's torn clothes. In the pocket of her favorite purple hoodie, a note was found with the words, "I love you, Weladine. You are our sweet baby. I am glad I became your mom and glad I gave birth to you on November 4th at 4:16 a.m., weighing 2 kilograms, 700 grams, and 48 centimeters tall. Mommy loves you." After the case was solved, detectives took the note from the evidence locker and gave it to Weladine's adoptive family. They hope that when the girl grows up and the right time comes, the parents will give her the message from the past. Whatever happens in little Weladine's life, one thing is clear: her biological mother loved her with all her heart. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video. Imagine an obsession so all-consuming that it becomes the air you breathe, the language spoken by your subconscious. For some it is music, for others art. But for Gemma Lily from Australia, this obsession became bloodthirsty criminals, the very ones who left a terrible mark on history, those whom society calls serial killers. Her interest was not idle curiosity. It was an obsession that took root in her brain and blossomed into dark fantasies that became brighter and more real than the surrounding world. Gemma didn't just read about criminals, she was writing a book. She didn't just dream, she arranged a wedding permeated with the aesthetics of the dark genre. The pinnacle of Gemma's wish list was something inexpressibly frightening. This is a story about two women who saw their own reflection in each other, about a room created not for living, but for the embodiment of the darkest scenario, and about an innocent youth whose life unwittingly became a prize in someone else's game. This is the story of Gemma Lily, Trudy Lennon, and Aaron Pajich. Today, we will look into that part of the human psyche where the line between fantasy and action, between hobby and crime, is blurred, and try to understand what pushes a person to turn the darkest plots into a plan of real events. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Gemma Lily was born in 1991. Her childhood was spent in Lincolnshire, UK, alongside her parents and younger brother and sister. At the age of 6, Gemma was diagnosed with dyslexia. This is a specific impairment of the ability to read and write against the background of normal intelligence. With the disorder, problems with recognizing similar letters and difficulties with remembering words are observed, meaning the child is able to study normally, but at the same time experiences problems with reading or writing. In other respects, everything was fine for Gemma, at least until her mother had a mental breakdown and joined a religious cult. This cult had a strong influence on the woman's behavior. She gave up all her property and accumulated savings in favor of the sect. In addition, her character changed. Gemma's mother became cruel and began to abuse her own children. Gemma was often beaten, locked in a room without food, and treated poorly. However, it was not only the children who suffered, but also the husband. Gemma's father, Richard, tried to influence his wife in some way, did everything in his power to return a normal mother to the children. But in the end, after 2 years of suffering and humiliation, he gave up and left the family, taking the children with him. In any case, the time spent with the monster mother did not pass without consequences for Gemma. At age 12, she began to suffer from obsessive ideas related to the massacre of people. The schoolgirl became interested in documentaries about serial killers and began to collect meat cleavers as a hobby. Gemma dressed in dark clothes, pretending to be a criminal, and fantasized about the topic of a violent death. The teenager imagined how she would create a torture chamber where she would bring all her offenders, people who had once harmed her, and would mock them, and then finish them off and get rid of the remains. This was the strange reaction Gemma had to the abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother. The girl was angry not only at her mother, she hated the whole world. Over time, Richard had a new partner, Naina. The woman immediately felt uncomfortable in Gemma's presence. She was uneasy because of the teenager's dark, obsessive ideas. However, whenever Naina shared her concerns with Richard, he ignored them. The man, like an ostrich, hid his head in the sand and didn't even want to hear about his daughter's strange hobbies. Gemma spoke openly about her ghastly dreams. Her father knew that she was obsessed with serial killers and wanted to become one of them. But Richard stubbornly pretended that nothing terrible was happening. Perhaps if Gemma had received the necessary psychological help as a child, this story would never have happened. Anyway, a few more years passed. Gemma was now in high school and was a diligent student. The girl, who possessed a fairly high intelligence, received high marks. By age 15, she discovered a new passion: literary creativity. In the teenager's head, incredibly dark and sharp plots about a serial killer were born. The schoolgirl came up with a character who dealt with people in incredibly colorful ways and gave him the nickname SOS. This name was chosen for the main character, not by chance, but in honor of the American serial killer, David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam. Gemma was simply obsessed with this criminal who took the lives of several people. The girl also made her fictional character the leader of a cult whose followers brutally tortured and sent innocent people to the next world just to please their leader. Surely the resentment toward her mother, who abandoned her children for some sect, found its reflection in the schoolgirl's writings. A quote from her story: "I feel that I cannot rest until the blood or flesh of a screaming, pleading victim gushes out and spreads everywhere." This would be too dark and creepy for any author, especially for a 15-year-old teenager. But unfortunately, ruthless torture and bloody massacres were the only topics that aroused a keen interest in Gemma. Richard knew everything and even read his daughter's ghastly creations, but did nothing to help her. Meanwhile, Gemma wrote a 200-page novel centered on the fictional character SOS, a serial killer and leader of a criminal cult. The girl was so immersed in her fantasy world that she almost stopped distinguishing fiction from reality. In honor of the main character, she even got an SOS tattoo on her body, signed with his name, and told people that whenever she got angry, an alarm went off. It seemed Gemma was trying to completely transform into her fictional character. The schoolgirl's father continued to be aware of the events, but it didn't bother him much. The man supported his daughter's desire to express herself in literature and considered all of Gemma's ideas just a way to get rid of the negativity accumulated from childhood. But Gemma's stepmother, Nana, was still in shock from her stepdaughter. When she tried to discuss this with Richard, he only brushed it off. He didn't want to hear anything about his daughter's psychological problems, apparently considering her fantasies just a manifestation of teenage rebellion. Nana tried her best to reach Gemma, to help her try to change her behavior, but the girl was against it. And the older she got, the more cruel and disturbing her fantasies became. Nana couldn't take it anymore, and one day called Gemma a psychopath, devoid of compassion. 2 years later, due to the schoolgirl's provocative behavior, Nana broke off her relationship with Richard. In 2010, when Gemma was 18, she decided to start a new independent life and moved to another country, away from her family. The girl settled in the large city of Perth, located in southwestern Australia on the shores of the Indian Ocean, and got a job in a supermarket. Colleagues considered Gemma a pretty, sociable, and very cheerful young person. Her true face was revealed about 5 months after the move. Gemma, feeling the favor of other employees, told them about her hobbies, torture, and cruel massacres that she loved to describe in her stories. Colleagues were surprised, and when Gemma brought her book to work and read excerpts, the supermarket employees were in shock. It seemed to them that they worked with a pleasant, even somewhat funny person, but in reality, it turned out that she composed stories about abusing innocent victims. But colleagues were even more struck by the collection of meat cleavers that Gemma dragged from home to show off. At that time, in her spare time from work, Gemma was engaged in promoting her own book. She created a social media page where she posted fragments of her work. One day, the girl finally achieved her goal and actually published her creation under the pseudonym Sin Demon, and also became a guest author for a magazine about serial killers. Gemma wrote articles about notorious Australian criminals such as Eric Edgar Cook and Martin Bryant. In 2012, when Gemma had already lived in Australia for 3 years, she was informed that she needed a special visa to remain in the country. The girl had no idea how to get this visa and did not want to return to England. She had to take some action, and Gemma decided to arrange a fake marriage. Somehow, she persuaded her friend of non-traditional orientation, Gordon, to take her as his wife. This marriage was fake and was organized solely so that Gemma could get a visa and stay in Australia. The wedding was distinguished by the strangest dress code imaginable. All guests were to dress as notorious criminals or fictional horror movie characters. The bride herself came in a costume of the television serial killer Dexter. Her father, Richard, flew to the wedding in a Freddy Krueger costume, the hero of the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. For her fake groom, Gordon, Gemma chose the nickname John Wayne Gacy, as he slightly resembled the famous American criminal in appearance. So, Gemma and Gordon got married and began to live together. To everyone around her, the young woman said that their marriage was absolutely legal and real. However, it was later revealed that Gemma repeatedly engaged in intimate relationships with other people outside of marriage. Be that as it may, the fake marriage lasted about 2 years. In 2014, Gordon tragically took his own life for unknown reasons, and Gemma got what she wanted. Now she had permanent residency in Australia, and she was left to her own devices. However, the husband's voluntary departure from life, even if he was a fake one, had very destructive consequences for the young woman's future life. After Gordon's death, Gemma had serious mental problems. For a while, she returned to England to live with her father and even admitted to Richard that she did not want to return to Australia. But the father convinced his daughter that she would be better off there. That is how Gemma flew back to Australia, planning to live in this country for the rest of her life. She purchased her own house and could fully devote herself to creativity. For the first time in her life, left alone, the young woman immersed herself in the world of fantasies she had created in her book. Her dark, obsessive ideas intensified, and Gemma couldn't stop thinking about serial killers and their crimes. Her obsession with torture and violence increased so much that now she herself wanted to harm someone for her own pleasure. For the first time in her life, Gemma seriously thought that she wanted to take a person's life and do it with extreme cruelty. While her previous work flickered with ideas of how to get revenge on her offenders, now she simply wanted to take a life. And it wasn't even revenge or anger at the whole world. Gemma just dreamed of doing it for entertainment. She was simply delighted at the prospect of gaining control over the life of a stranger, no matter whose. One morning, 23-year-old Gemma Lily made a wish list, and the first item on it was the desire to send someone to the next world. She openly told friends and colleagues about her perverted dreams that she was actually thinking about a massacre, but no one took her words seriously. Everyone thought it was just artistic fiction, a joke, or stupid fantasies. Meanwhile, the desire grew and became stronger. Soon, Gemma could no longer control it, and in any conversation mentioned the need to see someone's death. Gemma continued to talk about the specific desire to break the law, but no one reported her to the police. People considered Lily a bit strange and simply avoided communicating with her if possible. In 2016, 24-year-old Gemma met a woman named Trudy Lennon. Trudy was 42 years old. She was a single mother living in Perth, Australia. Lennon was interested in BDSM, was part of the community, and always attended meetings and events related to her hobby. She was a submissive, meaning in relationships she preferred to obey, and decorated her body with tattoos of the names of her former dominant partners. In early 2016, Trudy Lennon was going through a difficult period. The partner she was engaged to had recently left her. Because of this, the woman had financial difficulties. She couldn't pay rent and worried about where her children would live. It was at this point that Trudy first met Gemma. The women met through a mutual friend and immediately found a common language. They began to meet often, go somewhere together, flirt, and learn about each other's intimate preferences. Soon, a relationship of dominance and submission was established between them. Gemma was the dominant partner and took her usual pseudonym SOS. Trudy was the submissive and bore the name Corvina. She also got a new tattoo with the name SOS. Literally, a few weeks after meeting, Gemma suggested that Trudy move into her house, and she gladly agreed, as she was worried about the well-being of her 3 children. She had serious financial difficulties, and Gemma's offer was very timely. At first, everything went wonderfully. The women spent 24 hours a day, 7 days a week together, enjoying each other's company. However, the situation soon changed. Gemma finally showed her true face and shared with her new friend fantasies on the topic of massacre and torture. She gave Trudy her book to read and told her about her cherished desire to take someone's life. Lenone should have understood that Lily posed a real danger to her and the children and left, but instead, she plunged headlong into her partner's ghastly hobbies to please her. They began to play role-playing games where Gemma pretended to be a maniac and Trudy a victim. The house was decorated with all kinds of horror-style decorations. Posters from horror movies hung on the walls of the living room, and miniature copies of movie villains were located on the shelves of the cupboard. The women called their house Elm Street. Gemma even bought a motorcycle with the registration number 1SOS1. It would have been good if Gemma's obsessive ideas had remained in the world of fantasies, or at least only in love games with her girlfriend. But soon they crawled out into reality, and this led to very sad consequences. Gemma spent most of her time talking about her desire to commit a crime, and Trudy, without asking any questions, immediately agreed to participate in this. The women had lived in the same house for only 3 weeks and were already ready to commit a massacre. Gemma didn't stop saying that she needed a victim, and one day, Trudy stated that she had a suitable candidate in mind. His name was Pajich. Pajich was that rare person whose soul turned out to be completely made of light. At 18, living with his father and stepmother in Perth, Australia, he maintained a touching, almost childlike purity of perception. Every weekend the young man went to church, not out of habit, but out of a sincere need of the soul. His closeness with his parents was not a formal connection, but a deep, warm union. Aaron was an incredibly kind and cheerful young man. His wide and open smile spoke of the purity of his soul. But this bright inner world existed in a fragile shell. The fact was that Aaron suffered from an autism spectrum disorder, and his mental health made him vulnerable. School for the young man became not a place of knowledge, but a field of quiet daily struggle. He faced bullying, mockery, and cruelty from classmates who did not understand or accept his characteristics. In this unfriendly world, his main refuge and protector was the teacher, Megan. For Aaron, she was not just a teacher, a guardian angel, almost a friend who saw in him not a strange guy, but a person. Studying was difficult for Aaron. The standard education system was a complex labyrinth for him, but his mind found an outlet in the digital world. He showed a lively, passionate interest in computer science. Disassembling computer programs and immersion in video games were for him not entertainment, but an exciting exploration of a universe where logic and rules were clear and fair. Despite being bullied at school and the pain he was caused, Aaron did not become bitter. On the contrary, he tried his best to open up to the world and make friends. His main and most dangerous trait was that he saw only the good in people. He was blind to bad intentions, to falsehood, to cruelty. This naive, almost holy faith in the kindness of others made him an easy target for manipulation. People with impure thoughts quickly recognized him as an ideal victim. Pajich had a small group of friends with whom he sometimes spent time. His favorite topic of conversation was unusual stories about Japan. Aaron was a passionate fan of superheroes and anime. He was fascinated by the entire Japanese culture. He didn't just watch, he learned the language, dreaming of the moment when he could speak Japanese. This dream was a beacon for him. He had already begun to save money so that after school he could realize his cherished goal: to go to the land of the rising sun, a place that in his imagination was just as bright and full of wonders. Aaron Pajich was not just a teenager with characteristics. He was a walking contradiction, a complex inner world and naive simplicity in his view of others, digital logic, and a romantic dream of a far-off country. All this made him a unique, bright person, but this same purity made him vulnerable. All Aaron Pajich wanted in life was just to become happy, settle down, and start a family. But the guy's life changed as soon as Trudy Lennon, who had known him since childhood, told Gemma Lily about him. Trudy really had known Aaron for many years, as they had lived on the same street for a long time. She saw the boy grow up. Besides, one of Trudy's sons was friends with Aaron, considering him a family friend. Despite this, the woman suggested Pajich as an ideal victim for an attack. Unfortunately, Aaron himself had no idea who Trudy Lennon really was. As soon as the woman told Gemma about her plan regarding the naive teenager, she fired up even more with the idea of committing a brutal massacre. She couldn't get the thoughts of torture and violent death out of her head. Gemma plunged back into creativity and added new chapters to her book. Lily, trying to please her girlfriend, made a list on a piece of paper of various methods of torture she planned to apply to her victim: branding, castration, breaking bones, roasting legs, forced feeding, mutilating operations on genitals, oxygen starvation, scalping, Chinese water torture, and much more. Gemma became so carried away by the ghastly fantasies that she wanted to build her own torture chamber at home. On Elm Street, as they called their home, the women set aside a room that they planned to convert into a torture chamber. They lined the walls with blue tarpaulin to make it easier to wash away potential bloodstains. In the center, they placed a heavy bed for tying up the victim, and in a metal cupboard, they put various tools necessary for torture. There was a collection of meat cleavers that Gemma had been collecting for several years, scalpels for skinning, and a saw for cutting bone. Gemma and Trudy often visited DIY departments to purchase the necessary equipment and tools for torture. All their shopping trips were recorded by CCTV cameras. The women also bought bleach in advance to clean up the scene of the incident: a circular saw, cement for burying body parts, and a massive plastic barrel of hydrochloric acid with a volume of 100 liters, which was enough to dissolve a human body. To be sure the acid would work, the conspirators bought a large piece of meat in advance and threw it into the acid. Gemma and Trudy were so confident in their own impunity that they calmly discussed the massacre plans in correspondence, leaving a digital trail behind them. When the torture chamber was ready, the thirst to act increased even more. Now Gemma constantly talked about Aaron Pajich and what she would do to him. Lily believed that it was necessary to rid the planet of such losers and pathetic little people as Aaron, because the world was already overpopulated. This statement clearly demonstrated Gemma's arrogance, as she considered her crime almost a great mission. Finally, the bloodlust became so strong that the pair decided to move from reflection to action. Aaron Pajich was having breakfast when the phone rang. Trudy Lennon, the mother of his friend, was calling. She asked the young man to help install gaming software on her 14-year-old son's computer. Aaron, being an experienced computer technician and a friend of the Lennon family, happily agreed to help. At about 10 a.m., Aaron arrived at the shopping center where Trudy had arranged to meet him. Pajich was last seen on June 13, 2016, on CCTV cameras at a taxi stand. The guy was caught on frame when he was heading to the designated place, holding an iPad in his hands. After that, Trudy took Aaron to Elm Street. In Gemma's house, the young man sat down at the computer and began work on installing the program. Trudy treated him to a cup of coffee, and she herself went to the kitchen, to another part of the house, for a knife. Gemma Lily, taking advantage of the moment, came out of her hiding place, clutching a metal wire in her hands. She silently crept up on the guy from behind, threw the wire over his neck, and began to strangle him. Everything happened suddenly. Aaron, who absolutely did not expect an attack in his friend's house, immediately felt the threat and began to resist. He bit Gemma on the hands, trying to free his neck from the garrote, and his efforts were rewarded. The wire snapped. The young man's behavior at once destroyed all the conspirators' plans. They didn't even mentally admit that the victim would resist, so they continued to act according to the situation. Returning from the kitchen, Trudy Lennon pinned Aaron to the floor, and Gemma attacked him with a knife. The guy desperately defended himself with his hands, covering his body from the sharp blade. Because of this, his hands were badly wounded. But despite all his efforts, Gemma managed to inflict 2 knife wounds to his neck and 1 to his chest. One of the wounds turned out to be fatal. 18-year-old Aaron Pajich was cold-bloodedly stabbed to death in a friend's house, where he came to help sort out the computer. His life ended for no reason, just so that Gemma Lily could realize her cruel fantasies. After the youth's death, Gemma and Trudy realized that everything had not gone according to plan, for they had carefully prepared the torture chamber, intending to bring the victim there and carry out all the planned torments. But the victim offered resistance, for which Gemma was completely unprepared. Instead of regretting what she had done, Lily felt disappointment. She was angry that she finished Aaron off so quickly. The women still had to move the youth's body to the torture chamber. Trudy panicked because her children, including her 14-year-old son, who was Aaron's friend, were due back from school soon. Now, she and Gemma needed to urgently get rid of the body. The initial plan was to dissolve the dead body in a barrel of acid, but time was short and the children might have questions. The women quickly dug a shallow grave in the backyard of the house and buried Pajich's remains. When the children returned home, Trudy asked her 14-year-old son to help her lay paving stones in the backyard. The boy agreed. He had no idea that his friend Aaron's dead body lay under these stones. Having gotten rid of the corpse and evidence, Gemma sent Trudy the following message. "I see what I haven't seen before. I feel what I haven't felt before. It is incredibly inspiring. Thank you." To which she received words of support from her partner. The next day, June 14th, Aaron never returned home. His mobile phone was turned off, and no one understood where the young man could have gone. Later that same day, Aaron was declared missing. The police began an investigation and appealed to the public for any information. However, no leads appeared. The detectives had no idea where to look for the guy, and it seemed that Trudy and Gemma would get away with the serious crime. A total of 5 days passed, but no one ever came for them. Gemma was sincerely convinced that the police would not pick up their trail, so she began to fantasize about the next massacre. For more than anything in the world, this woman dreamed of becoming a serial killer about whom legends would be written. She believed that one day she could become a notorious criminal and stand on a par with her idols. Having managed to finish off Aaron and avoid punishment at the same time, Gemma felt so invulnerable that she bragged about her deed at work. The colleague with whom Lily shared her secret was at first confused and decided that she had finally lost her mind due to her wild fantasies. But when Gemma told her the agonizing details of the ghastly massacre of Aaron Pajich, she became terrified and immediately went to the police, telling the detectives about her friend's ghastly secret. Lily was bursting with pride. She wanted to shout to the whole world that she had taken a person's life. At the same time, she sacredly believed that the colleague would never give her up. This overconfidence became the downfall of Gemma and Trudy. On June 20th, 2016, a week after Aaron's death, police arrived at Elm Street. Detectives searched the house but found no traces of the young man. Perhaps they would have left, deciding that the tip was a false alarm. However, Gemma, on her own initiative, led the law enforcement officers to the backyard and began to brag about the new tiles. Apparently, she was eager to prove her superiority over the police and laugh at how she literally shoved their noses into the burial place. The next day, detectives returned to Elm Street with a search warrant, found a torture chamber with erased bloodstains on the floor, and dug up the backyard. They also found dozens of knives, scalpels, saws, a list of possible tortures, and CCTV recordings showing Aaron entering Lily's house. Gemma and Trudy were immediately arrested. A year later, in October 2017, both women stood trial, and surprisingly, they turned against each other. Trudy accused Gemma of her desire to take a human life, and she, in turn, shifted the blame to Lennon, motivating it by saying that it was her friend who brought Aaron to the house as a victim. However, the evidence clearly pointed to their joint involvement in the serious crime. The court ruled that Gemma Lily wanted to imitate the main character of her book, and that the book itself clearly showed the author's character and her enthusiastic obsession with serial killers and violent crimes in general. In the end, both women were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years behind bars. This is one of the longest prison sentences in Western Australian history. Gemma's father still assures that she is innocent. Richard says that he knows his daughter well and is sure that she would never raise a hand against a defenseless autistic teenager. The man said that in a frank conversation, Gemma admitted to him how everything really happened. At the same time, the daughter looked sincere, so he did not doubt her honesty. Richard also believes the case was rigged. Even despite the court's sentence, the father was not ready to admit his daughter's guilt. It seems he still hides his head in the sand, just not to accept the truth. Some things remain unchanged. Aaron's death was so meaningless that it seems that 28 years behind bars is little for such a crime. The fact that Gemma and Trudy's plan was never carried out to the end does not negate its monstrosity. This story is not about a specific crime. It is a warning that the darkest fantasies do not always remain on the pages of books or in the depths of the subconscious. Sometimes they find a way out, take shape, materialize in specific plans, and, most frighteningly, find accomplices who do not condemn but encourage. Gemma Lily and Trudy Lennon at some point forgot that someone else's pain is not entertainment, and someone else's life is not a plot for realizing dark fantasies. But will they find time behind bars to rethink all this? If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.